everyone, and welcome to this evening's presentation of the Electoral Boundaries Commission. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We know that there are other things going on this evening, and we appreciate your attendance. First, my name is Justice Dallas Miller. I'm the chairman of the commission, and I serve as a supernumerary justice of the Court of King's Bench in Southern Alberta. I want to introduce the other commissioners very briefly. Right next to me is Susan Sampson, a longtime resident of Sylvan Lake. So for those of us in the south, that's Central Alberta's local representative. She's an experienced municipal politician, councillor, and served a full term as mayor of Sylvan Lake. She has volunteered throughout her community for years and was a recipient of the Queen Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Medal in 2012, and she's volunteering for several projects in her community with a focus on public health care. Next to Susan is John Evans, KC, a lawyer based in Lethbridge here, but has a province-wide practice with a firm known as Stringham, and he focuses his work in Lethbridge. He conducts trials across the province, and his legal ability has been recognized by being awarded KC or King's Counsel. John volunteers as well as a member of the Alberta Judicial Nominating Committee. To my right is Dr. Julian Martin, a retired history professor from the University of Alberta. Julian has 2 degrees from Cambridge, and we're fortunate he came back to Canada to teach. He has volunteered on many committees in his home community in Sherwood Park, and in a sense, he's our capital city region representative on this commission. Julian has also served on provincial tribunals such as the Surface Rights Board and the Land Compensation Board. The far end of the table is Mr. Greg Clark, an entrepreneur and consultant in the information and knowledge industry. We're privileged to have Greg as a former MLA. He served 1 term in the legislature for Calgary Elbow. Greg also is a recipient of Queen Elizabeth Platinum Jubilee Medal for his community work. He currently serves as the chairperson of the Balancing Pool of Alberta, a very important organization that you don't realize affects your life. Greg holds degrees, an MBA degree and international or ICD designation. We are your Electoral Boundaries Commission. For the start of the evening, I'd like to have a few suggestions as to how we can make this run a little smoothly. First of all, silence your cell phone. Don't turn your cell phones off because we want to keep up to date with what's happening. The microphones, don't worry about that. They are professionally handled and taken care of by Cine Audio, and an audio feed will go to eventually to the EBC website in the public hearing section. This evening's proceedings will also be transcribed, and they'll be transcribed by Alberta Hansard, and we'll have the transcripts on the EBC website a few days after the meeting. Now, in order to give you some context and some background as to why we're here and why you accepted the notice to come here and present, and before I go to the PowerPoint, I want to introduce one other person, and where is he? Aaron Roth. Aaron Roth is sitting at the back next to the post. If you have copies of your written submissions, please provide a copy to Aaron. He'll keep track of it for us. He's the administrator of the commission. For those of you who are presenting this evening, we have to have had some time limitations. I believe we're full in terms of presenters, a full group of 10 presenters. So we're going to limit you to about 7 minutes with 3 minutes for question and answer from the commission after your presentation. You could convince us to give you extra time if you give us a report on the hockey game and it's positive. So keep that in mind. So you've been introduced to the Electoral Boundaries Commission. Our task, first of all, is to come up with a proposed revised set of electoral boundaries across the province. Why? Because according to the legislation, every 2 election cycles, we must look at the electoral boundaries. That's been the law for quite some time, irrespective of other changes. However, this time around, we have a significant change in that the government has passed legislation to add 2 more electoral districts to Alberta's legislature. So we're expanding from currently 87 electoral divisions or ridings or constituencies to 89 for the next provincial election. So that's one of the first tasks we have to deal with as a commission. And as you're aware, each electoral division elects 1 member for the Legislative Assembly to sit in Edmonton. And voters across the riding, they're the ones that choose that MLA. In addition to the move from 87 seats to 89, population has changed, and it has changed significantly in Alberta. Just to give you a background, the last Electoral Boundaries Commission issued their final report in 2017. And as you can see from that bar graph, the population that they relied upon was just in excess of 4 million people. The population that we are dealing with now is 4.88 million people. And that's based on the latest Statistics Canada census, supplemented and verified by the Office of Information and Statistics of Alberta Treasury Board. So we've moved significantly in terms of population, in addition to the increase in seats. Again, to give you some perspective, the last Electoral Boundaries Commission had a ratio of 62,609 population divided by 87 seats. The average number then resulted in that 46,697. The target range for an acceptable electoral district is the range -25 plus 25 using that 46,697. That was last Electoral Boundaries Commission, 2017. This time around, when we are able to give our final report, and by the way, our final report is legislatively mandated to be submitted to the Speaker by late March 2026. We will issue an interim report, what's come to be known as an interim report, in late October of this year. So we're starting out these public hearings, maybe I should have said this at the beginning, but we're starting in southwestern Alberta. We were in Pincher Creek this morning, beautiful Pincher Creek, beautiful day, and we came into Lethbridge for this evening session. This is our first day of public hearings. Starting next week, we cover Edmonton, Wainwright, Westlock, St. Paul. The week after, we hit Calgary and some rural areas, and the final week, we do the north, Port McMurray, Grand Prairie, Slave Lake, and places like that. So we'll be on the road for the next 3+ weeks in meetings exactly like this. And we'll be hearing from Albertans in terms of their concerns about boundaries, about population, about where the constituencies should be divided, and things like that. So the population did not expand or grow evenly across the province. So that's why we have got the very challenging task of making sure that the 89 ridings produced what we call effective representation. And effective representation means that there's relative equality between the populations, between the electoral districts in terms of population. We do not have the one person, one vote. That's an American system. In Canada, we call it effective representation, and it's backed by legislation and Supreme Court of Canada authority. When we complete our work, or when we actually put pen to paper and start writing our reports after our public hearings are concluded in June, we will be taking into consideration what we hear at meetings like this. But we are also compelled to look at several factors. And those factors include, and these are legislative factors, the relative population density throughout the province, common community interests and organizations. That's a big, significant factor. That can include industry, culture, art, values, and things like that. Geographic features. Geography is a great way to create communities and make lines of demarcation and boundaries. Communication and transportation routes across the province, they will come into play when we prepare our report. And as well, we need to make sure that we have understandable and clear boundaries. And that is a challenge, more of a challenge than most people realize, because it's a significant task. In addition, we are tasked with naming the constituencies or the electoral division. So I don't think it's a challenge in this particular part of the province, but we'll see. We have to name the constituencies that we recommend to the speaker. And we have an all-encompassing other factor in the legislation that allows us to take into consideration any information that might be of assistance, more so or over and above what we hear and what we get in terms of submissions on the website and in terms of the population and boundaries. So that little bit of background and introduction gets us to this point. That is the current electoral map of the province of Alberta, demarcating all 87 boundaries. And you can see a live or a larger version of that at the back of the room. And the electoral divisions for Lethbridge and surrounding area are also posted. And we were in Pincher Creek, so we had the bordering ridings for that community this morning. And here we are in Lethbridge. So we have 10 presenters, I believe, and the list I have, I'm just going to run through the presenters, and maybe you just identify yourself, and then I'll call you up in order. Drew Adamic, Cheryl Mahedon, Merrill Harris. Okay, got some time. Ken Sears. Okay, Jeff Kaufman, Maria Fitzpatrick, Belinda Crossman. Oh, there you are. Okay. Jeffrey Durlo. Jeffrey. Rob Mashiro. Okay. Maybe coming back from Edmonton. Who knows? Scott Paul. Keith Gardner. Cameron Mills. Tamara Mayanaga. Did I pronounce it right? I'll call you Tamara. How's that? Tamara. Randy Bullock. Okay, we've got some time for those individuals who haven't responded to show up. So we'll start with Drew. You please come forward. You can have a seat. The microphone will pick up what you have to say. And tell us, identify yourself, tell us what you do, and please proceed.
Thank you very much, Honorable Justice Miller and members of the Electoral Boundaries Commission here. My name is Drew Adamic. I'm a entrepreneur living here in Lethbridge, running a financial planning and advisory practice, serving clients not just all across in Alberta, but also all across Canada as well too here. Glad to be here on the traditional Treaty 7 territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy and the Métis Nation of Alberta, number 3, and all of those who call Lethbridge an area home. So my presentation to the commission today here, I was in the process of preparing a written submission, but considering time constraints, I'm decided to keep it as brief as possible, respecting everyone's time here. Understanding that the commission's legislative and authority and the guidelines are abounded here. One of the feedback I'd like to give would be when you're making your recommendations, while I understand the government has recently removed the requirement that municipal and boundaries be respected, at least that's what I may have heard online as well too. There, correct me if that isn't the case, but I do believe that at the when we look at, especially with urban boundaries within Alberta here, and especially here in Lethbridge, we are a growing community And I do, I'm not sure if we would be, who knows if we might end up getting one of those 2 new seats down here, depending upon how population grows. But I do believe it's important to make sure that that any urban issues within the urban communities, again, in Southern Alberta here, Lethbridge, Medicine Hat as well too, they're be respected. And, that the boundaries be respected as much as reasonably possible. I know you've got a tough job balancing out boundaries and you're factoring populations and everything to their balancing urban, suburban, and rural areas of the province. Other considerations I would like the Commission to take into effect would be particularly in regards to rural Alberta, regarding making sure that communities aren't necessarily divided unnecessarily by too much length. I understand in this day and age as well too, especially with things like Zoom, that it's easier to do virtual virtual presentations and meetings, but there is still that important connection factor, the MLA as ombudsperson, and having that local role is important. While outside the purview of the Commission, I would kind of recommend that perhaps maybe something to suggest if there are further concerns about that would be, the provincial government increased budgeting for rural MLAs to have more offices in their constituencies, because if there is any anticipation, we all know that people always like that option to go into the office to see their MLA or in their office as opposed to calling or emailing. The other thing, another consolation too, is regarding other consideration, I should say, would be the rights of Indigenous communities throughout, regarding making sure that Indigenous lands, nations, and their traditional territories are also reflected within the boundaries as well too. So, for example, down here in Treaty 7 territory, making sure that the interests of Indigenous and First Nations communities are also taken into consideration, so that their collective communities across the lands are also not, as much as reasonably possible, not too divided up as much, making sure that they also have their right to, their ability to have effective representation too in the provincial legislature. And that's more or less all that in summary, just kind of my feedback as well too there. I'm well aware of the work, that you all do there, and I know that you have a very, I don't envy your task as well too there. It's always very important and a very important part of our democratic process. So just here to give, that's my 2 cents worth here.
Thank you. Any questions? I may use this opportunity to maybe clarify something. On the electoral division maps, you will see that Lethbridge West, I'm just going to give you population numbers to give you some perspective. The 2017 Electoral Boundaries Commission, the population in Lethbridge West was 46,525. This time around, using the updated statistics, it's 57,725. Lethbridge East in 2017 EBC report was 46,204. I guess it's up there, but you have to have better eyesight than I do to read it up there. And then this year's population figure will be 53,599 for Lethbridge. So it gives you some perspective and some numbers. So, okay. Thank you very much, Adam. Sorry, Drew. Drew, Mr. Adam. Where do you live?
I live in Lethbridge West.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Cheryl Mahidi?
Good evening.
Good evening. Please proceed.
I have notes, but don't worry, they're 14 font, double spaced. So my name is Cheryl Mahedin, and I'm a resident and voter in the electoral district of Lethbridge West. I've lived in Lethbridge for more than 30 years. I'm a business owner, retired professor, grandmother, and community advocate. I care about my city and my neighborhood. I am an engaged citizen and am active on municipal committees and in my neighborhood association. I tell you all of this so that you know I am vested in this city and that I am a willing participant who works to make Lethbridge better. So I'd like to start this presentation by sharing some of what I've learned so far about this process and perhaps repeating some of what has been said earlier. A news release from the Alberta government and also shared by the Honourable Justice Dallas Miller was that under the Electoral Boundaries Commission Act, the population of each electoral division in Alberta must not be more than 25% above or more than 25% below the average population of all the proposed electoral divisions. So we heard that earlier. So in consideration of this 25% threshold, according to Elections Alberta information, there are currently 9 electoral divisions in Alberta with populations greater than 25% of the average electoral division population. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. So this indicates that there are Alberta regions who are underrepresented in the legislature. And so I would further quote the Honourable Mickey Amory, Minister of Justice and Attorney General, who stated the amendments we are proposing are essential to keeping up with Alberta's significant population growth and ensuring fair, effective representation for all Albertans in the legislature. So knowing these things, I agree and I understand that Alberta's population growth warrants a redistribution of the electoral boundaries, and there are ways for the minister to meet his goal by changing the electoral boundaries in Lethbridge West. So I would propose that as the 4th largest city in Alberta and an expanding urban centre, it is reasonable and democratic for the growing population to receive appropriate representation in the legislature. So as a resident and voter of Lethbridge, my needs are very different than a resident and voter in Barons or Colehurst or other rural territory. The municipalities are also very different, some of which include their economic and taxation structures, their population attraction versus population densification strategies, access to services, infrastructure needs, and so on. So as we learned, when the boundaries were redrawn in 2017, the average population per district was about 46,000, I think. And today that number is closer to 55,000. So in 2017, it made sense to incorporate rural territories into Lethbridge West. And now in 2025, it makes sense to remove these territories as the population of Lethbridge currently surpasses 11,000. Which coincidentally is almost exactly 2 electoral constituencies. So having said that, in a strictly numerical sense, political equity is not the same as political equality. And in a province as vast and geographically diversified as Alberta, a balanced approach is needed. So one that reflects population growth in urban areas, while still ensuring that rural voters have a meaningful voice in the political process. So this has already been accounted for when we factor in things such as population and representation in some rural areas. So special considerations for districts with significantly lower populations already exist. And this contributes to political equity. So for example, districts such as Slave Lake, Fort McMurray, Cardston-Siksika, and 3 others have populations that are less than half of the average, which is double what the 25% threshold set out by the Electoral Boundaries Commission Act requires. So I understand why this is necessary, and at the same time, I recognize that a failure to adjust urban seat counts could lead to vote dilution, where many thousands of urban voters become underrepresented compared to sparsely rural ridings. The special considerations for rural areas like Cardston-Siksika, Fort McMurray, and others are already provided with those areas having acceptable disproportionate representation. So to put that in perspective, in these underpopulated rural regions, one of their votes is the same as 3 Lethbridge votes, which is far off from, the American one person, one vote democracy that they used to be able to try and achieve. So I understand and accept this disparity, but what I would not understand is changing the electoral boundaries to add rural areas to the city of Lethbridge. So the rural territory that was added in Lethbridge West in 2017 should be returned to the McLeod area from which it was taken. This would result in better representation for everyone, both urban and rural. The opposite approach, which may include carving out Lethbridge West and adding in other rural territories, dilutes the democratic legitimacy of Lethbridge voters because, as identified, urban and rural voters have important but different needs and issues. So to be more democratically legitimate, the City of Lethbridge should have its rural electorate removed and allow that electorate to become part of a district which shares in its needs. So rural areas have special considerations that are not met when they are part of the city. So I would conclude by saying that redistribution, by restricting Lethbridge to having 2 representatives within the urban geographic boundaries and without outlying rural territories, would accommodate for the population growth that Lethbridge has experienced and would still ensure that Lethbridge has fair representation that aligns with the guidelines that you've set out in the Electoral Boundaries Commission Act. And I would hope that the committee considers the differences between rural and urban areas to be fairly and effectively represented, as opposed to diluting the representation of Lethbridge voters. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that well-reasoned presentation. I have a question.
Sure.
Where, if you can explain briefly, what part of the country or the rural area are in Lethbridge West?
Colehurst is part of Lethbridge
okay.
West.
Okay, yeah. So
Yeah.
I should know that. I drive by it all the time. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
Thank you. Lovely presentation. Very logical. Always like that.
Yeah, me too.
But I have I want to reinforce something that you acknowledge, and that is that this commission is all about what constitutes effective representation.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of suggestions in the Acts about the lines of inquiry one might pursue in deciding upon that for a particular district or a set of districts. But also, we heard a lot this morning about what would constitute effectiveness, which is something I hadn't really thought about very hard, but obviously is part of our brief.
Mm-hmm.
I would also like to suggest to you, if I might, just for your further contemplation,
Mm-hmm.
that there is a significant difference between population and its balancing and the number of eligible voters.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to struggle with that one too, perhaps under the category of any other things of significance. But the number of eligible voters in both Lethbridge East and Lethbridge West is almost identical. And that seems at first brush to be sort of good, and it's about in the middle of the pack across the whole province.
Right.
35,500 eligible voters, according to Elections Alberta. Not quite sure where I'm going with it, but
Mm-hmm.
any moral talk, and we're bound to hear lots of it, about balancing populations for cases in order to promote equity and the like, fail to understand that there are many other factors for us to juggle as well. Thank you.
Right. You're welcome.
Okay, thanks. One brief question before I let you go.
Cheryl, is it all right if I call you Cheryl? So you made a comment that Colehurst was part of.
I might be confusing federal and provincial electoral.
If you look, I double checked because I thought
Okay.
maybe I was wrong, but the north boundary of Lethbridge West is highway number 3. So this is the south side of highway number 3. So there's really no rural communities involved in Lethbridge West, but that's not to take away from the point.
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Oh,
And
great.
if you have any written material you want to leave it with
Mhm.
Erin at the back.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. And now take the Merrill Harris. So, okay, Ken Sears.
Hello, Commissioners. My name's Ken Sears, and just to give you a little background, my great-grandfather got off the train in Brooks in 1910, looked around, got back on the train, and came down to Nanton. And then my family were down into 6 generations in those foothills. So I do have some understanding of rural Alberta, at least rural southern Alberta. I've been here, I came here in 1971, I went away for a while, came back, and I've been back for the last 25 years. I'm presently retired, active retired. Now, because of my background, I had wanted to come to the presentations in Pincher this morning, but my truck decided it didn't want to do that. And that will be relevant to maybe some of the things I'm going to say about ability of people in rural Alberta to access representation. However, what I've really been thinking of, and I'm going to try and keep limiting myself to more and more smaller and smaller areas in southern Alberta, but I've been thinking about the Highway 22 corridor that runs from what is now called Diamond Valley, real estate agent's term, was Turner Valley, Black Diamond, runs straight south and hits Highway 3 just east of the Crow's Nest Pass. Now, the reason I want to talk about that is if you go down that highway, off to your right or off to your west, very quickly on, you go by the Eden Valley Indian Reserves, 2 little ragged little bits of land. You can't see them on most maps until you've actually focused down on it. You got to keep hitting that plus button. Eden Valley. It's a stony reserve. It's actually more closely related to the ones north along the number 1 highway to Canmore. So culturally, it exists in and of itself, and that's part of the point I'm trying to make here. You go further south, and what you're doing is you've got Forest Reserve on your west, and as you get down to the Chain Lakes Reservoir, you've got Forest Reserve on both sides, and the Porcupine Hills, and so you have this narrow little strip of land, which is the municipality of Ranchland. It has a grand total of 97 people in the entire municipality, but it's functional. And it's not that isolated in that a lot of the people in there have relatives or have land over the Porcupine Hills further, they exist within the context of other municipalities as well. But the reason I'm bringing them up is Ranchlands also has on its very southern border the Grassy Mountain coal site. And that is a fault line. That is a political and social fault line in this province, because you cannot find 2 communities more different than Crow's Nest Pass, which is 8,000 people living on coal mines, and many of them working across the border in BC, and those ranchers, those hardcore mossy back ranchers to the north of them. Yet they are represented by a single MLA out of Claresholm, and I, for the life of me, do not see how he is able to honestly and fairly represent both communities. That's a fault line. And so you go down from there, and then I guess what I'm doing is I was identifying in my mind problems here. And I can talk about that part of the country for a very long time. But the point I'm making is these rural municipalities particularly, or rural ridings particularly, riding is not a monolith. It's not the same. It's, it contains within itself all sorts of different groups, all sorts of different cultural groups, political groups, interest groups. And so when you look at that and people say, well, gee, we've got a riding with, with that many that much smaller population. In some ways, yes, you do. But given distance, given visibly disparate interest groups. I live in Lethbridge, and yet I do not. I can name you more social groupings out of the in southwestern Alberta and rural Alberta than I really can in Lethbridge. They tend to get lost in the larger population, which is not to say that the larger population should be in any way discriminated against. The one vote person, one vote, and I understand you're saying this is not the whole point, and I understand that in Canadian context. But these ridings have to make some legitimate geographic and cultural sense. As I said, I can identify the Crow's Nest Pass ranchlands as a fault line, but then I come closer into Lethbridge, and what we've got on the west border here is this narrow little corridor that joins this weird hourglass-shaped riding of Cardston-Siksika, which has a population of 25,291, far below the median. And yet Cardston-Siksika, as I understand it, exists simply because you had an MLA who said, I don't want to have to try and represent people from the Saskatchewan border all the way to Cardston.
I'm getting the warning that you're running into deadlines. I just want to correct, though, Cardston-Siksika, my understanding from the data I have, has a population now of 47,000.
Okay, one of the problems I've had is trying to find accurate numbers. Okay, but Cardston-Siksika is...
It's in the range.
It's just in the range.
Yeah.
And it's and it does not... Anything north of Vauxhall socially exists in the context of the Cluny and Gleason and the Blackfoot reserves up there and Calgary. So it again, it's not really representing a coherent social group. And I'll do this real quick. I'll get really fast to this. There is concern, and there's concern in Lethbridge that, gee, we've got these two ridings here, and we've got these smaller ridings with smaller rural ridings with smaller population. Somebody's going to come along and say, let's take a portion of Lethbridge and put a big wedge of the rest of southern Alberta, and it'll all come down to Lethbridge, and it'll make the numbers, and it'll look really good. Well, that's what I call the Costco version of redistricting. You can drive into people drive into Costco all the time in Lethbridge, and they drive through their hometowns, and those hometowns are dying. So in order to maintain a viable political system in rural southern Alberta, you have to resist the temptation to turn those ridings into a mixed riding because they will be buried and they will be lost. I'm sorry I took so much time, but that's,
Okay. Any questions from the panel of Mr. Sears? Okay.
So if you're looking at the legislation, with the changes to the legislation in section 14 and the relevant considerations, now we're able to, regardless of the municipal boundaries, to take into account communities of interest, and is that what you're saying? Look, these things should be more than just a physical boundary, or we should have a common community aspect, common interest, common focus, common goals.
I would say the common interest is such a vague term that almost anything can be poured into that mold. Sure. That's worrisome. That to me, the common interest thing is, and I haven't seen any indication of this in previous redistrictings, but the common interest to me is almost an invitation for some smart politician in Edmonton to decide to let's play games with that, because anything can be a common interest.
So, I mean, the legislation says communities of interest, and then it says including municipalities, regional and rural communities, Indian reserves, and Métis settlements. And so I suppose it's somewhat restricted by virtue of the surrounding examples. Is that what you're talking about in terms of, like, for example, where you talked about the Crow's Nest Pass versus the ranchers to the north? To me, what I understood you were saying was there's a sense of community, a sense of a commonality with respect to Crow's Nest Pass that's different from the ranchers and that community.
Oh, yes, very much. So, and that was the point I was making. In any riding, you have these subgroups. Now, I happen to be a very big fan of the municipal governments because they really do have a one-to-one, voter-vote relationship.
In a non-ward system.
In a non-ward system. We're just talking rural here. And that, to me, I look at ranchlands, they represent their interests. As the town council in the Crow's Nest Pass represents their interests as they see them. The question I had with that, and this was, I guess I had just identified what I thought was a problem with that particular riding.
Sure. What I'm interested, Mr. Sears, is what would, so, I mean, your point is well taken in terms of community interest could be, I mean, assuming there is a smart politician in Edmonton, they could do something magical with that. But we have the catch-all, any other factors the commission considers appropriate. Would you be able to share with us what factors we should be considering that to help us achieve the goal you would like us to achieve?
Again, any other factors is such a broad, I mean, and so.
No, I'm asking you to.
Okay, just like what I think.
Yeah.
I think one of the things you have to do is, first off, and in this context, you have to look at the urban-rural divide. And it is there, it exists, and I think that has to be taken into consideration and honored. But then you have to start looking at all the things they've talked about over the decades, which is what highways cross a particular geographic area, what different cultural, groupings are there. Eden Valley Reserve is not in any way, shape, or form the same as the surrounding territory, nor really in a deep, important sense are the Blackfoot Reserve, or the Blood Reserves. They exist in and of themselves. They have connections and interconnections with the surroundings, but they have a different existence. They have a different identity. And even southwestern Alberta, everybody talks about Alberta as being oil and gas. If you look at southwestern Alberta, the 7 municipalities in southwestern Alberta, oil and gas in this part of the province is not a growth industry. Oil and gas reserves have been declining for the last 20 years. Sometime in the 1980s, they went down and they started resurveying every last piece of ground in this province, starting around Waterton. They went right down to Precambrian. They know what's in the ground. Southern Alberta, southwestern Alberta is not an oil and gas industry anymore.
I'm going to have to use the chair's prerogative to
Chair.
wind this up. Thank you for your engaging presentation, but let me ask you this one question. Are you for or against blended riding?
I'm against them.
Okay.
They don't work.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much for your comments. Mr. Jeff Kaufman. And I know we're on a time clock here, but because a couple of people have missed, where I'm being a little loose with time limit. So, Mr. Kaufman?
Seeing if Barry wanted to provide a more updated 3-1 way.
Good. What period? Or sorry, still at the any time left? Oh, good. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Good. Well, you get 5 minutes extra just for that.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm glad they're winning then.
Good evening, Commission. Justice Miller, members of the Commission, thank you for the opportunity to address you. My name is Jeffrey Kaufman. I've been a resident of Lethbridge for 33 years, living both in Lethbridge East and Lethbridge West. I hold a bachelor's degree and master's degree both in political science from the University of Alberta and the University of Lethbridge, respectively. I served 4 terms on Lethbridge City Council. For the last 14 years, I've taught the municipal government courses at the University of Lethbridge, and I undertake policy work for smaller municipalities and have acted as an interim CAO, most recently for the town of Colehurst. In my time this evening, I'd like to respectfully ask the Commission to consider 3 points in your final report, and I have one additional question at the end for the Commission. Since you're all very well versed on your legal and legislative obligations, I won't add any background to my legislative references. The first point is to request that the Commission's final report emphasize the values and prescriptions set out in Section 14 of the Electoral Boundaries Commissions Act, with specific references to 1, Section 3 Charter stipulation, that population must be dominant consideration in drawing electoral boundaries. 2, that electoral districts ought to have understandable and clear boundaries. And 3, that considerations of communities of interest are paramount, especially as they relate to municipal jurisdictions with populations at or near the district quotient, in this case being the 54,929. I do trust that the Commission will submit a factual data and evidence-driven report, so these 3 conditions will inevitably be part of your considerations. By including this emphasis, it's my hope that the government cannot misinterpret the necessity to redistrict the province towards effective representation. The second thing I wish, respectfully, or actually the second thing I state, is that I support the Commission in following the data, especially as it is intended to meet the obligations under Section 15(1) of the EBC Act. There are 9 constituencies that have a deviation greater than 25% over the quotient, 7 of which are in Calgary and Edmonton. Calgary Northeast and Edmonton Ellerslie are the 2 districts that require the most attention, with 55.1 and 50.1% positive deviation, respectively. Any reflection on the principle of the Charter requirement for effective representation ought to lead the Commission to recognize that the significant growth in our largest cities has led to the unequitable and ineffective representation in the legislature. I do support following the data, and I know you will. My third and final point comes from both my academic studies and my teaching. Political scientist Aaron Leipert has written extensively on the processes of redistricting for fair and effective representation. The second of his 16 criteria states, and I quote, "The boundaries dividing the electoral district must coincide with local political districts." Respectfully stated, municipal boundaries are not simply demarcations of local jurisdiction. Municipalities are unique policy units, each with its own political identity and values. I'm certain that Ms. Sampson can attest to the fact that Sylvan Lake is not Red Deer, nor is it Rocky Mountain House, nor is it Red Deer County. As a former councillor and as an interim CAO, I know that the citizens of Lethbridge are not the citizens of Colehurst, and vice versa, even though they are separated by 9 kilometers. Each is different. And when I say different, I'm not referring to any ideological alignment or how someone votes. By differences, I mean communities of interest. Dr. James Lightbody, formerly of the University of Alberta, would identify this as the local norms and expectations, quotes, that leads municipalities towards their own approaches and policy directions to meeting local challenges, and these challenges are different for each community. When you take part of a large urban center to create a rural-urban district, you fail to understand or respect the fact that the residents in both the urban and rural communities have different culture, economic, historic values, goals, and considerations. For example, the local norms and expectations for the people of Colehurst or Picture Butte or Lethbridge County are different from the local norms and expectations for Lethbridge residents. If we think of this in a federal context, nowhere in Canada does a federal riding cross a provincial boundary. The ridings of Lakeland, Alberta, and Battleford's Lloydminster Meadow Lake, Saskatchewan represent the residents of Lloydminster, Alberta, and Lloydminster, Saskatchewan, respectively. The City of Lloydminster is divided to acknowledge the 2 communities of interest, and ask the Commission to remember this when redistricting for population growth, especially in Edmonton and Calgary. For further consideration on community of interest, I'd suggest the Commission read the literature of Dr. John Courtney from the University of Saskatchewan, Dr. Jennifer Smith from Dalhousie, or Dr. Ray-Jean Pelletier from Laval. These are my 3 points then. That the report emphasized the values and prescriptions set out in Section 14 of the EBCA, especially regarding Section 3 of the Charter, that electoral districts ought to have understandable and clear boundaries, and that the consideration of community of interest, in this case municipalities, are significant. My question then for the Commission regards a rumor circulating in our community, and you've heard one presenter this evening already refer to it. On January 29th, 2025, Lethbridge Herald quoted John Middleton Hope publicly stating that, and I quote, "Another constituency association will be formed in the near future in anticipation of a possible third district being created in Lethbridge," end quote. The Herald continues citing Mr. Middleton Hope as stating, quote, "Make sure the other, his desire to, quote, make sure the other two districts in Lethbridge also go Conservative," end quote. My question to you is not the source of his information, but given the previous statements and understanding of Calgary and Edmonton, combined with the data of Lethbridge West and Lethbridge East, Lethbridge neither needs nor deserves another constituency. So as a leader in this community and somebody who was approached to try to verify these sort of statements, my question is quite simple. Has the Commission been tasked by anyone with creating a third constituency in whole or in part involving the City of Lethbridge or surrounding area? I know the answer to that question, but I'd like to be able to advise this community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kaufman. Perfect timing. Your time's up. However, I can assure you that you are the fourth presenter this evening. We had two this morning. No one has hinted anything or said anything to the Commission about what you just quoted at the end. So thank you. We've heard nothing about that. Okay, Susan? We've got time, so we'll...
I have one question. We've had numerous written submissions, and if you just, if I can use the term follow the data, clearly the people who took the time to write have said that they do not want to see hybrid ridings, rural ridings, anything like that. But we also saw some very strong, and they're in the minority of written submissions, of encompassing the rural communities of Coaldale, Colehurst into the City of Lethbridge. And we saw that suggestion more than once, and it surprised me because it came from people like yourself who are knowledgeable about politics at the municipal level. And they had very good reasons about, I live in Colehurst, I travel to Lethbridge, I work there, I go there for recreation, I shop there. I just actually sleep in Colehurst. I don't do anything else there. What's your thoughts on that? Not living in this area, is the closeness of, particularly you're the CAO in Colehurst, is there a closeness there that would not rub them wrong if they became Lethbridge?
Thank you for the question. Yes, definitely it would rub them wrong because the people of Colehurst see themselves as being unique from the citizens of Lethbridge. It's literally 7 minutes from my house to the office in Colehurst. So we are just that close. However, I can attest that there are distinct identities. Serving for 14 years as a member of council in Lethbridge and working as an interim CAO in Colehurst, there are distinct cultural values and identities in the two communities. And the same would hold true with Coaldale as well. Following the data and working with the numbers to expand to encompass that broader community, because it would have to be contingent. You couldn't, I won't use the word gerrymander, but you wouldn't create something unusual. You're going to put this, or you're going to put one or both constituencies again over a threshold. And if we're trying to stay as parity with the quotient as we can, including them is going to throw off your numbers. Culturally, I would say that they are distinct. Otherwise, the people of Colehurst would actually sleep in Lethbridge. They would buy a house in Lethbridge. They would live in Lethbridge. But they choose to live in Colehurst. They choose to live in Coaldale. They choose to live in Pictou Butte for a reason. And that reason usually goes back to their values, to what they value in community, to what they're looking for, to their culture. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does, and I think that's what we need to hear is the reasoning, because that scenario could happen in anywhere, Alberta.
Absolutely.
But because we're talking about it here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Okay. Any other questions of Mr. Kaufman? I guess that's the final bell, Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you.
Thank you for your
very much.
presentation.
Thank you.
Our next presenter is Maria Fitzpatrick. Ms. Fitzpatrick.
Okay, bonjour or bonsoir. Good evening to the members of the panel, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you this evening. I have some notes here for my presentation, but this presentation is from my experience as the MLA for Lethbridge East from 2015 to 19, and I'm happy to see my colleague here, and from my heart. I love Lethbridge. So now I'll begin. As soon as I can get my notes up. So as you mentioned about the current population, we did increase in population, but I think we still sit in the same position as we did in 2017. And I presented in 2017, and my presentation was to maintain the boundaries in Lethbridge East and Lethbridge West, because I felt the boundaries that were there provided an opportunity for the MLA, myself, to meet with my constituents. And I will tell you that I have walked every street in Lethbridge East, from Hardyville to 6 Mile Coulee. I've been on every street, and I have talked to the constituents of this riding. When I talk to the constituents of this riding, I hear common concerns, common values in terms of our constituency, in terms of our city. Many people feel the same way I do. They love Lethbridge. It's a really wonderful place to live, and I'd like it to stay that way. Okay. So the constituency is made up of a very diverse population. And I would say that there is a feeling in this community that everybody is welcome in this community. And I'd like it to stay that way, as I said before. We have many white-collar workers in this constituency and in Lethbridge West. We have people at the university, at Polytechnique, at the hospital, at the research center. We have local businesses, Indigenous businesses, and we all operate very much as a community. We are Canes fans. We are Bulls fans. And I'm telling you, unless you live in this community, you do not know what that means unless you go to a game. And then you can feel what this community feels like. Excuse me. This community in Lethbridge, there are also blue-collar workers. And all of those workers are represented. They're represented because they can access their MLA. And I'm telling you, I saw people in my office, I saw people at church, I saw people in the supermarket, I saw people on their doorstep. And they talked to me about their concerns and about possible solutions. And I have to say that I brought those to our caucus and to our government in Edmonton. I would say that I've probably had a conversation with the majority of people in this constituency. I live in this constituency. I walk, I drive, I attend events, I go to the swimming pool, and even though I'm no longer the MLA, I still hear about the issues and concerns that people have, and I am asked, what can we do about it? But I think the key thing is that no matter who I'm talking to, whether it's a nurse at the hospital or whether it's somebody who's doing genome research out at the research center, the concerns are the same. The feelings about our community are the same. People have talked to me about coming and doing a presentation tonight. In fact, I played golf last night, and the 3 people I played golf with said, are you going to talk about this? Are you going to talk about that? And I have included that in my comments. Certainly, everybody has concerns about our healthcare in Alberta right now. In Lethbridge, we have incredible concerns about the possible contamination of the Old Man watershed. That's our only source of water. And it will affect us. It will also affect anybody downstream right to Hudson's Bay. But they talk about it, and they want to know how we can stop those things. And I volunteer on 5 different community committees. And every single committee talks about those things. They talk about our health care. They talk about the contamination of our water. They talk about, how do we deal with hate that came up since the boycott at Coots. They have those concerns, and they talk to me about it. I can't say if they talk to the current MLA, but they talk to me. And I'm here to say that this is our community, and we have common interests. We have common concerns. We have a commonality where I talk to somebody and they tell me how much they care about their neighbor. We had a fire on our street a couple of years ago, and the entire neighborhood was out, coffee, tea, whatever for the firemen to help the families that were affected by that fire. And that happens every time there's an incident in this community. An incident can happen outside our community. Yes, they'll be concerned, and we certainly showed that when the Fort McMurray fire happened. But we come together as our community, and we're proud of Lethbridge. And I guess my last comment to you is that please don't change the boundaries in Lethbridge. Thank you very much.
West and east. Both west and east, is that what you're saying?
West and east.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Fitzpatrick. Any quick questions? Yeah.
Hello. Good to see you. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Great to see you again.
Great to see you.
So I actually, first off, thank you for your submission. I appreciate it. And just, I haven't had a chance to speak yet today. So thank you to everyone who has submitted so far and those who are here in attendance. It means a lot. This is democracy in action, and it's good to hear a few different perspectives. So thank you very much for that. I actually have just a kind of almost a tactical question on, as a non-Lethbridgian or Lethbridger, I just observed that Lethbridge West is slightly larger than Lethbridge East population-wise. So our numbers have Lethbridge West at 57,725, or just a little over 5% above the average, and Lethbridge East at 53,599, or about 2.5% below the average. Where's the growth in Lethbridge coming from, east or west, or is it fairly balanced? And would it make any sense to just nudge the line over a little bit to reduce the size of Lethbridge West a little and increase the size of Lethbridge East just by moving over a few streets? Is there sort of natural boundaries there? Again, I don't know Lethbridge that well. So.
Okay, there probably is a natural boundary, but if you talk to anybody in Lethbridge, 13th Street's the boundary. And if you're on the east side, you're in Lethbridge East. If you're on the west side, you're in Lethbridge West.
All right.
So even though, I don't know, I guess at some point the river would be the boundary, but it isn't right now. So the population I think is well managed in terms of the two constituencies, because there is a slight difference in the population in East and West. There's probably more blue-collar workers in Lethbridge East, and if you have a conversation in Lethbridge East, the conversation is like this. If you have a conversation in Lethbridge West, it's probably more, I want to say, university-oriented. And that may not be exact, but that's certainly the way people have described the city to me. Personally, you know, you go over the river, I can go to No Frills on the east or the west, it doesn't matter. But as I said, I love Lethbridge, and there's so much here that people are involved in and that they do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Anything else?
No, but Mr. Clark's question may be carried over to the next presenter, who's a municipal or a city councillor. So. Okay.
And I will say that I am also a recipient of the Queen's Platinum Anniversary Medal as well.
Congratulations. Thank you. Okay, Ms. Belinda Crossan. Crossan.
And I am not here as a member of City Council.
But you might have answers to some of the questions.
I might, though.
Yeah,
yes.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for allowing me the ability to speak to the commission on this. As you noted, my name is Belinda Crossan, but I'm here today as a local historian, and I want to provide you some context and history on the Lethbridge ridings and on Lethbridge in general, which will give you some sense of why we are a little different than the rural areas around us. So Lethbridge was one of the original 25 electoral districts that Alberta created. The original riding, called the Lethbridge riding, covered the town of Lethbridge and a wide swath of rural areas. Lethbridge, though, changed very dramatically in those early years of Alberta. In 1906, we became a city, and we went through a population boom that quadrupled our population in just a few years. Recognizing that, in 1909, the Lethbridge riding was divided into Lethbridge District and Lethbridge City. We have had a riding that has only been urban since 1909. We have never included rural areas since 1909. A long precedent for our community. In 1913, the Lethbridge District, a rural riding, was divided into Taber and Little Bow. So in 1913, the only riding that used the Lethbridge name was the Lethbridge City riding. And understanding that, in 1921, they just removed the city part. So we have been the Lethbridge riding until we were divided in 1969. 1969, when the city had grown large enough to have two ridings, Lethbridge West and Lethbridge East were at that time created. And when they divided Lethbridge, they chose to divide us along 13th Street. And when you were asking natural boundaries, at some point, yes, the river will be the natural boundary. But to me right now, 13th Street is an incredibly natural boundary. 13th Street was originally created as Westminster Road. It is one of the oldest roads in our community, and it's actually an old range road. It has been a divider even before there was a Lethbridge. And the original plan for Westminster Road was to go from Cooley to Cooley. It has always been a separating road. And it was named Westminster Road, deliberately being named after the Westminster District of London, England. And so it is actually named after Parliament. So how apropos that we actually divide our Lethbridge East and Lethbridge West ridings by the Parliament of Westminster. So it makes a lot of sense. And that boundary is natural to Lethbridge, not in a geographical way, but in an understanding way. The city uses 13th Street to divide almost all of our neighborhoods. London Road on one side, Victoria Park on the other. Westminster on one side, Senator Buchanan on the other. Legacy Ridge on one side, Uplands on the other. 13th Street is used by the municipality as a boundary, and it's still used by the by the province as the boundary. In 1969, when the two ridings were made for the 1971 election, West Lethbridge had just started to be annexed and was just starting to grow. And that's where the 13th Street came, because West Lethbridge was not very large, definitely at that time. I have no doubt that as West Lethbridge is growing, and yes, it is the fastest growing part. We have this weird thing in Lethbridge. We don't have an east side in Lethbridge. We have a north, south, and a west. because West Lethbridge is so new. But as the west side keeps growing, I don't doubt at one point we will just talk about East and West Lethbridge, and the East and West riding will make sense much more in that context. And so that's how we get today to the two ridings. As I said, 116 years of only being within the city itself. You also have to understand that Lethbridge, though, not only is our riding separate from the area, Lethbridge has always been a little bit separate from the area. We actually had the rural areas of Lethbridge back in 1918 threaten to boycott Lethbridge. We were the only city in Alberta, not the only community, but the only city in Alberta that voted to stay wet. We wanted to keep alcohol when they voted for prohibition. You know, Edmonton and Calgary, no problem going dry. Lethbridge said, let us keep booze, please. And some of our rural communities who did not want alcohol threatened to boycott us and not let their young people here. That is just one of the many ways that we have stood out from the rural areas. We have 3 post-secondaries in Lethbridge, which makes us a very different community than many of the surrounding areas from a population area. We have had all sorts of ways that we stand aside. And to me, that boundary of keeping it only within Lethbridge makes not only sense today, but it makes historic sense. And it truly reflects how different we are from the surrounding communities. I know earlier you asked Mr. Kaufman about Colehurst. I recently did a history of Colehurst for the community, and yeah, we're not the same. We both shared a coal mining past, but in very many other ways. The thing about the city is we've always had very strong rules. Historically, if you wanted to not follow the rules, you would have lived in Hardyville and Colehurst, right? And so the values, the personalities of the communities developed in very different ways and remain that today, even though they are as close as they are. Now, that's just, I want to, again, provide you that context and give you a sense of why the ridings work for Lethbridge historically and today.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Croson. Do you have a printed version of that? Or, could you share something with the commission?
I could. I'd have to fix it up.
Okay.
It's certainly not in just notes for myself right now, but I certainly can provide you the history of how we got here. Yeah.
Okay, please do. And you would confirm that Lethbridge West is the growth portion of Lethbridge?
It is, especially because we always compare north, south, and west. East and west kind of grow the same, but west is growing a little bit faster. And like I said, I assume at some point that boundary will be moving to the river. I don't think it's there yet.
Okay. Any other questions?
Excellent. I learned a lot.
And if you ever want a tour when you're down in Lethbridge, give me a call.
She does a great cemetery tour. Okay, thank you so much. Mr. Jeffrey Durlow? Durlow.
Yeah, I included a slide deck for this.
Okay, great.
Okay, so hello, my name is Jeff Durlow. I am a GIS technician and developer that works at the Alberta Biodiversity Monitoring Institute. My technical background, I have a bachelor's degree in computer science and geographic information science, so I am very into like maps and location data and all that, so this will be a very technical presentation. So as we get into this, the one thing that I am going to request from the committee is that the city boundaries are respected when drawing city boundaries. So for Lethbridge specifically, I want 2 constituencies completely contained within the city, no sharing with bedroom communities. Yeah, it doesn't fill for whatever reason. Thank you. Thank you. And then,
yeah, we're in good time, so there's no reason to rush through your presentation. We're well ahead of schedule, actually.
Okay, good. Okay, because it is a very dense presentation, so rehearsals, I'm like, oh God, I have to really rush to get to 7 minutes. But anyway, I see a city boundary as something as a clear and understandable boundary that should be respected and followed. I also kind of see that, I know that we have, say, 25% deviation is the standard. I think 10% is probably a bit more, it's a bit tighter, and yes, it is a bit tighter, but I think the previous committee did a pretty good job of getting a 10% deviation. So that would be like a 50 to 60,000 point. And Lethbridge's population, 110,000 divided by 2, that is smack on the deviation. Very, very close. And as someone that lives on the south side of the city and in Lethbridge West, I just feel that I have more in common with anybody anywhere inside the city than anywhere outside. So a quick map of the situation in Lethbridge. So yes, we have the boundary between the two ridings. That will probably have to move. That's okay because the west side is growing much faster than the east. But again, central point, I do want to keep hammering over and over again, respect the city boundaries, lock that in place, do not deviate. And before I get into how exactly I would do it, I'm going to quickly go over the situation in the other areas around the province. Again, rounded to a decimal point, to a single decimal point. Lethbridge is exactly 2.0, and then Red Deer as currently as it has also roughly 2, Strathcona County also roughly 2. And then for the smaller cities, in my opinion, I would like one urban and then one blended constituency, just because they're a little bit high. But I think St. Albert and Grand Prairie, the constituencies they have right now, is the template that probably should be followed for communities like Airdrie and Medicine Hat. And then very quickly for the cities of Calgary and Edmonton, dividing their Statistics Canada July 2024 by your average riding size, you get 28.6 and 21.7 for Calgary and Edmonton respectively. So you can fit at least 28 constituencies in Calgary and at least 21 in Edmonton. So that's 2 more in Calgary, 1 more in Edmonton. If flooring that, so taking only 28 and 21 is what it would take to ensure that none of the constituencies in those 2 cities are crossing outside the city limits, I think that's an acceptable trade-off. And now going back into Lethbridge, because I am a GIS person, I'll kind of walk through how I would split it. So previous boundary commissions, as kind of discussed, use 13th. They also use Stafford Drive. So if you go south to north to south, you use Stafford Drive. And then when you hit St. Basil's, it switches over to 13th and it goes 13th all the way down south again. So I think it's just a matter of finding a different switchover to go from 13th and Stafford. So going into the city, since that quarterly Statistics Canada data only goes to the city level, it doesn't really have census blocks sub-city as far as I could see. So I used the 23 municipal census to kind of record this little exercise. At that point, the city had a population of 106,000. And if I did my math with the census tracts, the west riding had 56,000, the east riding had 50,000. So in that scenario, we'd be moving 3,000 people because that's a difference about 6,000. So add 3,000 to east. That would make the numbers balance. So I'm just going major road by major road, major like east-west road. So from St. Basil's, next major one I would probably look at is 9th Avenue North. Using that, you'd be moving about 1,000 people, well, 1,000, like about 1,200 people over. Not quite enough. Go down to 5th Ave. You'd be moving about 2,600 people. That's pretty good. But, I'm going to go a little bit south to the highway, and that moves about 3,500 people. And that, is a little bit more than enough to handle the 3,000 that we're looking to move if we're using the 23 municipal census as our guide. So as a quick summary, the blue line there is what I would suggest the boundary would look like. And the green line is the current boundary as it currently exists. And yeah, that basically covers the ground of what I wanted to cover.
Do you mind just going back, putting that map back?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, keep going.
Yeah, so yeah, that's basically all I want. That's basically the main thing I wanted to cover. Just using the highway, and the cool thing is it's such a clean and elegant way of handling things, because like the north side would be using Stafford, south side would be using 13th, and the populations would be, as far as I could tell from the municipal census, pretty balanced. So yeah, that's what I would suggest. I also cut out a couple, I'll also admit, because I was looking at this and I was looking at like, oh God, I'm going to run out of time. I did come up with a quick suggestion for the surrounding areas, mapped it out and then cut it out for my presentation altogether. But really, really quick, process was, okay, let's glue together Tabor Warner and Carson Sitka, just see if we have two. Well, we have 47,000 and 50,000. Some is about 97,000. So to get to your 10% deviation, you need at least 3,000 and no more than 23,000. Is there any community nearby outside that hits that? Well, Strathmore has 16,000 people. So if you grab that, put that in, you'll be around, the combined will be about 3,000 over. So 100. So it's 110,000. So it's like 113,000 total. Split and then there was like a whole bunch of splits, but the split came up with at the end, you split it north to south. South riding has Carson County, Flood Reserve, County of Warner, entire MD of Tabor, 40 Mile County, call it Carson, Tabor, Warner. Math is correct, it should be 56,000 people. Then the north riding would be entirety of Lethbridge County, entirety of Vulcan County, Sitka Reserve, the portions of the current Carson Sitka that sit inside of Wetland County, plus grabbing Strathmore to make the numbers work, 57,000 people. I made a map for that, and then I was like, oh, I'm not going to have time. I got to scrap that.
Send that to us. Talk to Aaron about how to.
Yeah, and I would dub the Northern Riding Little Bow and revive a name from the 2010 commissions and earlier. So.
We'd like to see that.
Well, thank you very much, Jeffrey. Very detailed and innovative, especially if we're going to move the boundary at all within the city. Any questions from the panelists?
I have one question. So we've heard lots of comments on staff. I liked your drawing the line farther out past 13th into Stafford.
Yeah.
But you'll agree with me that once you hit 16th Avenue, 13th Street becomes a non-factor.
Yeah, it curves around Scenic, and then it just kind of takes a straight line.
Right. So
yeah, I'm just saying preserve that line as it is.
We're just making an arbitrary line.
Yeah.
Isn't the natural geographic boundary the river? And you've got significant growth and potential and future growth, projected growth, actually doubles in the dirt on West Lethbridge. The growth is going to be accelerated there.
Yeah. I think you're probably about a decade away from moving the boundary to the river. Just because like right now it's about a 60-40 split.
Bear in mind that this doesn't get addressed again for at least
8 years. Yeah.
Yeah, and more likely 9. So what we do today we need to be projecting into the future of where we think things are going to be.
Yeah.
I think they were pretty brave when they made the dividing line 13th way back in the day because West Lethbridge had next to nobody there. Mm-hmm. You had a university, you had the very rudiments of community being developed over there.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's your thoughts in terms of us being that type of forward thinking, bearing in mind that this isn't going to be addressed for probably 8 to 9 years?
I don't necessarily hate it. I think you'd have to consider how much of if you want to overcorrect for west, I think you still have other options before you hit the river. Like you're using Stafford at the highway in my proposal, but Stafford goes all the way to 6th Avenue South. That would be the first thing I would check. And then at that point, you might actually, instead of using 13th, at that point, you might say, okay, the river on the south side, south of Whoop Up Drive, Stafford North. Like you're going to you can do this in like pieces. You don't have to jump all the way and using the river the entire way just yet.
There's not big population west of the river, or west of 13th in any event. But to me, notwithstanding the history, there can't be a difference in sense of community on the west side of 13th Street versus the east side of 13th Street. In fact, that area in what we would say the downtown core, that is a community, and with the same community interests. So if we want to be if we want to look at things from a micro community perspective, or a don't want to, I'll say like a cell perspective, but not a terrorist cell. They're going to have, you know, there's numerous micro communities within even the downtown core.
Yeah. Right? Yeah, sorry, I just have one quick question. I'm going to just actually point at the map if you don't mind. And apologies for the sound.
Yes. Yeah. Well, yeah, that is a neighborhood, Senator Buchanan and Staffordville. I suppose you could glue them all together. I wouldn't, like, obviously I don't have the entire census in front of me at this second, so it's possible, because you can clearly see in the base map I am cutting through one of the neighborhoods, Senator Buchanan there. But this was something that I just quickly kind of quickly threw together that seemed like a pretty easy solution. But yeah, like Scenic is a very good north-south line to use. Even though there's not very many people between Scenic and the river, it's just a few seniors' homes and a couple of apartments. Yeah.
Julian, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you very much, Jeffrey. I followed along with your prose version of the GIS work that's in your head. Yeah. I actually followed that. And what I would like to suggest to you is don't feel bounded by a 10% variation. Yeah. Try on a scenario that's 15 or even 20. Yeah. I mean, just do those thought experiments. Mm-hmm. Because, the Act does give us the latitude, which obviously we would wish to use very sparingly, but it does give us the direction that, okay, fellas, it's normal to use that variation. It's not obscure. It's not in the legislation as a concession to incompetence by the commissioners. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and obviously when you're putting municipalities, you're not going to have a clean onto the 1,000.
Obviously, right. And it would be madness to try for that kind of mathematical parity. So I'd be interested, if you are going to submit to this commission your general sketch that you described for us of how you would move all those pieces of territory. Do a version where you use a larger variation as well.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah. I mean, give us sort of a perfect. I'm just interested if you're willing to do it, because it's really interesting work, and you've obviously got some.
Yeah, I am very interested in this kind of stuff. I know the written deadline is basically passed, so and I've only really done it with the two that have surrounded the city, because obviously I'm not going to cover all 89 ridings in a 10-minute presentation. That's kind of ridiculous, but yeah.
We would be particularly interested in the territory that you did describe.
Yeah, okay.
Because I think the reason you're presenting it and the reason why perhaps you modeled it in the first place is trying to deal with some issues that have Lethbridge pretty much at its center.
Yeah.
So, again, for us to be able to see a scenario that provides a greater context than the ripple effect of moving boundaries, that's very helpful stuff.
Okay.
Okay, Jeffrey, thank you very much. And please don't tell anybody this, but just get your written stuff to Aaron Roth.
Yeah.
I know you may have missed the deadline for the written submissions, but
Miller's giving you an extension.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sounds good. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the work you put into it, obviously. Yeah. Okay, we have one more presenter before the break, and I see he just arrived. Rob Murashiro? Just in time. Welcome.
Welcome. There's a storm brewing out there. It's not going to get blown away.
4-2.
Okay. Good.
Not quite that tall. All right, thank you to the Commission for hearing my presentation today. And okay, which is the Blackfoot word for welcome. My name is Rob Miyashiro, and I'm the MLA for Lethbridge West. And I'm currently the MLA. And I say currently because I don't feel that my position as MLA entirely defines who I am, and nor does it reflect my journey to how I got to the present. So I'm a lifelong Southern Alberta resident, born in Lethbridge and raised in Taber. Well, can't say I would grow up in Taber because that would be debatable. I attended the University of Lethbridge, and I've resided in Lethbridge for about 45 years, almost equally split between Lethbridge East and Lethbridge West, and spread around to the north side, west side, and the south side. I was a human service professional for over 40 years in southwestern Alberta, providing services and supports and developing new programs in the fields of children's services, disabilities, employment, mental health, and seniors. And while I was in the senior sector, I was the executive director of Lethbridge Senior Citizens Organization for 17 years. And my workplaces included Picture Butte, Cowley, Guyana First Nation, Lethbridge, and I also had a really cool position that was regional in scope, so I got to travel around southwestern Alberta. Commissioners, I've also participated on over 60 boards, working groups, and committees, local, provincial, and national. I also served 2 terms on Lethbridge City Council from 2013 to 2021. I'm also very proud to state that I was the first and only Japanese Canadian and Okinawan Canadian elected to Lethbridge City Council. I'm one of the only few Japanese Canadians and Okinawan Canadians ever elected to a provincial legislature in Canada. I'm telling you about this to give you a sense of who I am and also to lend credence to my claim of knowing my community and my region. And as Councillor Croson probably told you, the provincial constituency boundaries pertaining to Lethbridge have only included the boundaries of the state of Lethbridge, have only included the boundaries of the city of Lethbridge since 1909. There are 4 important reasons I'd like to highlight to maintain the boundaries for Lethbridge West and Lethbridge East. So I'd like to elaborate on that. So firstly, is the diverse nature of our population. In the past 10 years, the demographic makeup of Lethbridge has changed dramatically. We have the largest Nepali Bhutanese population in Canada, and we now experience secondary migration of this group from other parts of the country. Lethbridge accepted the largest number of Syrian refugees beginning in 2016, with more Syrians arriving steadily to the present. Lethbridge has welcomed almost 600 Ukrainian refugees since 2022. We have seen an influx of newcomers from many African nations to our community, and I dare say my neighborhood, Legacy Ridge, which is split by Lethbridge West and Lethbridge East boundaries, we're home to people from at least 7 different African countries. Lethbridge is also home to large population of immigrants from all parts of India, as well as Japanese Canadians, Chinese Canadians, and Filipino Canadians. And of course, we're home to many urban indigenous peoples, mostly Blackfoot from the Guyana and Piikani nations. Secondly, representation of diverse voices matter. I explain the growing diversity of our population to provide context for the concept of representation, like community represented by like community. It's important that residents can A, see themselves in their elected officials, B, be confident that their elected officials understand their needs and will act in their best interest, or C, be confident that elected officials will treat them fairly relative to others in their constituency. To further illustrate the first point, after I left the City of Lethbridge City Council, I was approached by someone who asked me if I knew what she missed most about me being on council. So I said, must be my great debating skills and repartee. And she said, no. What she missed was that she no longer saw herself represented in our elected officials in the city because she was Japanese Canadian. This is an important aspect, I believe, of our democratic values and how representation works for people in our community. The third thing is diversity of an urban setting. The diversity of our community is a feature that enriches the entire community. Now, as I love food, as people here might know me, I can say with all honesty that the diversity of a community's restaurants is entirely reflective of the ethnic makeup of its residents. Where we once had Italian, Japanese, and Chinese food as our most exotic culinary offerings, Lethbridge now has dozens of ethnic restaurants. But unfortunately, because of geography or community makeup or settlement patterns, this type of diversity of ethnicity and food is not present in rural areas and smaller urban municipalities closer proximity to Lethbridge. So combining any part of the city of Lethbridge with the rural areas or smaller municipalities would really do nothing to ensure appropriate representation for residents of Lethbridge. The fourth thing is population. Both Lethbridge East, which is approximately 48,000 people, give or take, which is probably more now, and Lethbridge West, which is approximately 50,000, are really close to the provincial average that was cited in the 2016 to 2017 Alberta Electoral Boundaries Commission for riding population. But there are ridings like Edmonton South and Edmonton Southwest that have exploded to 80,000 plus. While Edmonton, Ellerslie, and Calgary Northeast are also well over the average. So perhaps the focus needs to be on providing adequate representation for these large urban ridings rather than creating rural urban or urban constituencies. One thing I'd like to note.
I was gesturing, I just pause there. I want that clicker because I want to show a point that you just made. So
okay.
keep going.
Okay, I thought you were like, stop that. I can take a hint. So I want to point out something that Jeff was talking about when he's talking about boundaries. And what the commission might not be aware of is that we are almost at the western edge of the city limit growth in West Lethbridge. In fact, a new subdivision that was just approved for on the west side of 30th Street takes us right up to the border with the county, up just by Sunset Acres, Mountain Heights, not Mountain Heights. Further south of that, Waterbridge, Watermark, I think it's called, is also moving out that way. But on the southeast corner of the city, we have a large residential developments that are started about 3 years ago, and the Southbrook neighborhood, the second that the lots were all serviced, they sold lot and started building houses. And this is no word of a lie. If you go in towards the southeast corner of the city on the highway out to the on Highway 4, you will see almost a fully developed residential neighborhood that was not there 3 years ago, including the school, maybe just 3 years ago. So I think when you're looking at the internal boundaries of what Lethbridge West and East could look like, the fact that it looks like there's a lot of land in the west. It's relatively encased by the county to the far west and to a bit to the northwest, and also the north west corner of the west side in the city's boundaries is designated as economic development area. So it's not residential; it's more for light industrial and commercial.
What area was that?
So that's the north. It's called the West Lethbridge Economic Development Area. It's south of Highway 3 on the northwest corner of our city limits on the west side.
Near the what?
It's way north of that.
Okay.
Right directly south of Highway 3.
Yeah, so where that concrete.
Right by there, yeah.
Yeah,
So
okay.
so that area where the concrete plant landscaping is, that area is constituting the beginning of what was designated as the West Lethbridge Economic Development Area. And so that's not designated.
Boundary, the road that runs directly west from there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it'd be everything north of Walsh Drive. I can't remember what that was.
Yeah.
And right to the highway. And you can tell from there because we're just west of the cemetery on the west side, there's a large electrical substation. And that was purposely built there to accommodate any new, more commercial development than residential. So I think that's important for the commission to know that is, unless the residential development on the west side grows just a bit to the west, but more to the south of where everything is, it might not grow as fast as some of the stuff in the southeast corner of the city which is people want to be on the south side, right?
Fourth point again, I lost track.
Yeah,
of it.
sorry. So my fourth point was more about population. So we talk about roughly. You look at our populations on west and east are very close to what the estimates should be, or the target populations are. Whereas I know some of my colleagues in caucus there, their ridings have almost as many people as the city of Lethbridge. And so my point, I guess, to that one was, I think these discussions are important because we're looking at future development for electoral boundaries. But really the urgency, I think, from talking, especially with my colleagues and with people in Calgary that are in northwest or northeastern Calgary, they're dealing with huge numbers. And so we can kind of look at things like Lethbridge and say, well, that might be nice, but I think the urgency is for proper representation in those larger urban areas.
Can I stop you there, Rob?
You can stop me.
We've got about 5 minutes before break, so
okay.
Let's pose any questions from the panel to someone that really knows about boundaries.
Dr. Martin.
I actually was particularly taken by your theme of the diversity of new communities, in effect, that have come into Lethbridge in the last decade, pretty much. And any anthropologist will tell you that food is culture. And I think it's an interesting way to assess a community and its growth over time. So I thank you for the whole suggestion. Although it must be said, anywhere in Calgary you can get anything you want from any country. So I don't know how far that this line of measurement could take you. But your other point was to contrast that with what you would get in, 20 miles into Tabor or 20 miles into Siksika. And I think that was your general point, was it not?
Yeah, the point was to combine a more rural area with any parts of Lethbridge. If you were even looking at increasing the size of riding in Lethbridge, just to encompass more people in the rural, because we all know how widespread some of the rural ridings are. I mean, what is Lesser Slave Lake? Have like 17,000 people, 5-hour drive from corner to corner or something.
It's still low.
Right. So, but it's just to say that we have the kind of community and the kind of constituencies in Lethbridge that the type of population and the type of representation I think that would be required are a little bit different, because we have changed demographically, and I think that's important. It's important for me to say, may not be as important for the commission, but it's important for me to say that that is something that I talk to constituents about, that they want to know that there is someone representing them.
Great.
And it is about the food, Dr. Martin.
Look forward to coming back and trying out some of these restaurants. Thank you again for your presentation. I guess I'll ask you, I don't know if I couldn't see you behind the pillars. I don't know if you were here for some of Jeff's presentation, some of that back and forth. Just maybe remind me again, where is the growth in Lethbridge? You'd mentioned southeast. I guess I'm just thinking, if we're going to tweak, in terms of perhaps moving a boundary a little bit one way or a little bit another, because as it stands now, west is a little bit bigger and east is a little bit smaller.
Right.
Is that logical in your mind, that east actually has a greater growth potential and therefore it makes sense this way, or is there a need to perhaps adjust to accommodate for greater growth in west?
So let me, thanks, Mr. Clark. So Lethbridge West, or West Lethbridge, not Lethbridge West. West Lethbridge has at least four or five new neighborhoods being developed right now. Right,
the new development on the Lethbridge University land that they've now
exactly
they've given it the go, but nothing's happened yet. Yeah, I don't know how big that development's going to be.
So the Canyons is almost at their limit now with roads. Like I said, Watermark hasn't been developed. There's just a school in fire hall there, so there's some room for growth there. Copperwood has a little bit of room for growth. Gary Station has a bit of room, not a lot. Again, there's that new development plan on the west side of 30th Street that would take it right to the county line. Country Meadows is another one that's moving towards that entry. Then once you get to that, then you're up against the county on two sides. On the north side of like on the north side, which is mostly part of East, there's enough development space that's been approved in North Lethbridge probably for residential development for probably 30 years. There's lots of growth. Black Wolf 2 is just getting underway. There's right up to the county line on the north end of Lethbridge. On the north side, there's enough room for 1, 2. There's been one big area structure plan done for that area. And then in the southeast, like I said, where Southbrook is, there's room for growth because there's a subdivision that's gone in south towards the Coulee, 6 Mile Coulee, and then there's Southbrook where the new school is, and they're all pushing out to the southeast towards Wilson Siding. So in terms of land mass, I think you want to look at there's a potential without annexation issues on the west side. There's probably a similar amount of land ready to be developed, maybe a little bit more on the west side. So when you're looking at those issues,
I think we'll have time for one more question, and then we're going to have a break because we've been sitting here for almost an hour and a half. My clicker isn't working, so I was trying to get to the map. So if somebody can help me with that. But another question of
What's your thoughts on the geographic boundary of the river in terms of west and east?
Right. Well, like I was saying too, if you wanted to split out historical Lethbridge West neighborhoods out of Lethbridge West, I think that's slightly problematic for me, being the
the MLA. Oh, but if you weren't the MLA,
yes, if I weren't the MLA, you still look at historically what neighborhoods are grouped together. Downtown's been a part of really Lethbridge West, and because that's how it identifies, and that's where the downtown area is. And when you move further to 13th Street for Lethbridge East, that still makes sense. I know Jeff was talking about Stafford Drive and all the weird jog at Canberra Boulevard and all those things. I don't think that's as problematic because most people will know during an election what side of the road they're on because they're just told where they are, right? Yeah. But I think in terms of future growth, there's a lot of Coulee Top area on the east side of the river when you're looking at the growth and you see the river's the natural boundary. I'm not sure how many years out that'll be because all of this stuff, I don't know if you can see this, all of this, did I just move something? Oops.
That's a natural break time.
Look, I'm messing with you. Okay. So if you look at, let me just show you. Like I said, here's where some development is. But here. Oh, sorry. Great. And so this is where the big development's going to take place here. A lot of this part in here, because the university's right there, right? There's lots of room for development here, but for the foreseeable future, the developers are focused more on the stuff that are going up to the boundary just past 30th Street.
Right.
Right. And so, like I said, this part right here is designated as the West Lethbridge Economic Development Area. So there's not going to be any residential there. And so if you look at it that way, they're not going to build houses this side up. This part's already developed, actually right up to about there.
So, and art.
Yeah.
years? Lethbridge West or East has more people at the end of the day in terms of growth?
Lethbridge West will have more people because they have more people now.
Right, sorry, the growth, but will the growth be even between the two, or is one going to grow more than the other?
I think we're going to see a lot of growth in the southeast, so in Lethbridge East, in the next 10 years. I'm not sure when they're going to top out the development. Part of the issue is too, the city doesn't want to have too many development fronts at one time. Right? It just stretches your resources too much. There's limited fire. We had to build a new fire hall in the southwest corner in order to accommodate growth. That means the next fire hall has to go into the southeast to accommodate the growth there. So there's a point where the city is going to just say, well, they're trying to put the brakes on for development where it makes most sense and it's sustainable. Because when we start putting out, well, and a lot of you know this, when we start putting fire halls in and stretching the resources of the city, then your taxes are going to go up. And then there's no way around that, right? There's no subsidies for fire halls and for firefighters. No.
Susan wants to shorten our break by asking one last question.
Just a really short question. You can deal with this later. When I'm looking at Lethbridge West, following highway number 3 at the top of the map there, if you want to look at that, why is that line so weird? Like, why isn't it following the highway clearly?
Yeah.
You know what? Thank you.
Yeah, no, I know you're.
That.
I know what you're saying. Yeah, so north of Highway 3, east of the river, it's all parkland.
Oh, okay.
Right, so that highway, so right where the river is, and that corner of here, I'll show you right.
We've got a good. It's only
so right here, just so you know.
Oh,
right?
okay. It's a geographic.
Yeah. So this, remember, 13th Street, Stafford Drive, Cooley Top, River Valley Development. So there's nothing going to go in there, right? Tulsa Gravel is right in here. Ball Diamond, wastewater treatment plant. So it looks like there's a lot going on right in here, but really it's not developable. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you for your well thought out and very relevant presentation, Rob. We're going to break now for about 10 minutes. We'll be back at 8:36.
Thank you very much for your time.
Can we have everyone come back, and can we get an updated score? 5-3? What's the time? Oh, great. Pardon? Okay. Okay, so this is back. Okay, we have now had our evening break, and our next presenter, and we have five presenters, Mr. Scott Paul.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Scott Paul. I'm a retired lawyer, now author and storyteller. I've lived in Lethbridge for 32 years, raising 2 daughters here and purposely retiring here as well. I'll echo sentiments of many of the previous presenters. I love Lethbridge, and it's a place that I'm connected to and call home. I prepared a small written submission that I submitted online. But I feel humbled because I've heard such good presentations earlier. My written submission was brief, concise. It essentially said, population-wise, why even looking at Lethbridge? Because you have bigger fish to fry, in my mind. To use a legal phrase that I would use from time to time, down here it's de minimis. You have significant issues to deal with. And while you may be tempted to tinker, I would encourage you to not, for the very reasons that have been stated by previous presenters. In place of what I was going to submit or repeat, and I didn't want to repeat, I'm going to offer up a story. I grew up in a small farming community near Brooks, a place called Rainier. One of the panel members will know where Rainier is, because I went to high school with John in Brooks, where we were bused from. My father raised cattle, grew hay, and farmed land that had been broken, homesteaded many years before. And we had a community school, one that I'm very proud of. It turned 100 years old 3 years ago, called Alcoma. And in Rainier, that part of Alberta was homesteaded by pioneers coming from Tacoma, Washington, settling in Alberta, a lot of them anyway. And they wanted to recognize their roots, and they called the school Alcoma. Al for Alberta, and Coma for Tacoma, where they came from. When I graduated in grade 9, because it only went up to grade 9 in 1976, we had a graduating class of 17 students. It was a vibrant farming community. But over time, that has changed, and it's reflective among my classmates at that time. Many of us moved on. Most of us moved on. A few stayed to farm the land, but not many. We moved to Calgary. We moved to Lethbridge. We moved to Vancouver. One man moved to Switzerland. But when I go back to Rainier, when I talk to my classmates who remained on the farm, we don't talk about things like public transportation, bike lanes, overcrowded schools. Their interests are far different than the ones I deal with daily. They're talking about commodity prices, irrigation, input costs, and they're also talking about, will Alcoma School survive? Because there's been declining enrollment. And their funding keeps getting pulled back because it's tied to school population. And so we have very different interests. And although we still connect at a personal level and nostalgic level, we don't connect on the more primary issues that are local to our communities. And there's a rural reality and there's an urban reality. I've heard very compelling arguments against the hybrid model. And there's a flip to that, not just the urban perspective. I think of Alcoma School, a declining population, and I would want an MLA fiercely and fearlessly promoting that school and trying to maintain that school because it's such a vital cog to that community. And yet, if we pull that into an urban riding, if we pull outlying rural areas into urban ridings, we start to take away, we water down both the community and that MLA's agenda to push in Edmonton for funding for that school. I want to see Alcoma in another 50 years. I don't want to see that school be taken out. And I think effective representation by MLAs committed to that community, that diverse group of interest is so, so important. So as you consider the larger picture, and I think the larger picture lies north here, Lethbridge, if you chose to tinker, I would hope that that would not include tinkering, including outside neighboring bedroom communities. I chose to retire in Lethbridge. I could have chosen to retire in Coaldale or in Colehurst, and from an economic point of view, probably cheaper to live there. But there's a reason I retired to Lethbridge, and it was brought home to me by the speakers before when Maria Fitzpatrick was talking about the Canes and the Bulls. People identify with that. Belinda Crowson, who talks about a historical boundary, the Westminster Road. I'd never heard that before. And yet, intuitively, I understand that. And intuitively, when you have neighborhoods in Lethbridge, that 13th Street does demarcate neighborhood. And then when Rob Miyashiro talked about the diversity of ethnic restaurants, that speaks to something which I don't think you will find necessarily in Colehurst or Coaldale or those outlying regions. So I would urge the commission to leave Lethbridge ultimately alone, leave these lines alone, and move to the bigger issues which are in Calgary, the exploding growth in Edmonton. I'll add just a couple more things. I was a divorce lawyer, and I had clients across Southwest Alberta, Pincher Creek, Crow's Nest Pass, Coaldale, Colehurst, Lethbridge, Cardston, Mayor McGrath, and they brought different issues to the table, notwithstanding the common themes are custody and child support and dividing up property, but the way they approached that and the communities they came from were very different, and I recognized that as a lawyer. I didn't recognize Lethbridge East versus Lethbridge West. But outside, there are different interest values, and I believe that Lethbridge is distinct. And I would encourage you to keep the lines written as they are. I think there is some danger in trying to project population growth. I think Mr. Miyashiro has indicated where population growth can occur, but we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what's going to happen. We have relative parity between the two, and I would encourage the commission that the most significant work you will do will be north of here. And I don't want to discourage you, but I would almost say, leave us alone. Those are really my comments, and I would leave it at that, subject to any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Paul.
Scott, in your thoughts on community interest, and you heard Mr. Kaufman, and I don't want to put words into his mouth, but essentially community interest was defined by municipal boundaries, that those had a significant demarcation of where those community interests began and ended. Do you agree with that?
I think for the most part I would. I think if we look at celebrations that are marked here in Lethbridge, I think you will find a greater diversity in those community events than you would find in outlying communities. They will be different. You know Betty McKay, I imagine. She's from Brooks. I was talking to her just yesterday. They have in Brooks a Bolorama, which I'd never heard of. It sounds very interesting. They park big trucks around a hotel up there, the Brooks Hotel, and there's a bull riding event right in the middle of the town. So I think our celebrations reflect our different communities, and I think you will find that in outlying areas here. I'm not sure where you live, John. I know you were living outside of Lethbridge for a while. I suspect that you would find that the celebrations that mark your community, that make your community, are different than the ones here. We may all celebrate a Canada Day, but even in that, we celebrate it differently. In Lethbridge, we have a swearing-in ceremony for new citizens. That's a big part of our community each year. And so I would believe that I would tend to accept Mr. Kaufman's argument in that, yeah.
What about the example that comes to my mind is if you look at, if you go east of Tabor and you take Grassy Lake and you take Burdett and you take Bow Island and you take a significant segment of the population there, and you would refer to them as Mennonite origin. Their cultural assimilation, the fact that they're so similar, they don't seem to be governed by municipal boundaries. And the same might be said for the LDS community in the south, Raymond, Sterling, McGrath, Cardston, even extending into Warner and farther. So there are some factors, and I think the legislation gives us the ability to look at those, that transcend political lines. 13th Street is just an arbitrary line that was put in place and has been there for some time. But it seems to me that there's almost a different mindset in terms of west across the river, one side or the other, to some degree, having lived in both.
Yeah, there may be, and yet there's still, I don't see any reason to move beyond what we're doing now. The old maxim, you don't have to fix it if it ain't broke.
Right.
And there doesn't seem to be, I guess tonight I have a greater appreciation of what Lethbridge is, because we've had some fine speakers describe both a historical, geographical, and that wonderful presentation by the man with the GIS. I don't see compelling reasons to change things.
Any other questions from the panel? Well, thank you very much,
hey,
Scott. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
We'll look forward to your book.
Our next presenter is Keith Gardner.
Hello, everyone. My name is Keith Gardner, like you just said, and I want to, first of all, take some time to thank you folks for coming down to Southern Alberta. The work you're doing right now is the work of democracy, and that's really important, especially in today's day and age, and it's not nothing, and I wanted to say it that I really appreciate it. So, funnily enough that you mentioned Sterling just a moment ago, that's where I grew up. I spent my life until I was 20 in Sterling. My parents still live there. They raised my nephew there, and I still go back there pretty frequently. I moved into Lethbridge to go to university, and I've had the ability to live in Ottawa and Edmonton before I moved back to Lethbridge about 6 years ago to raise my daughter here. Before I get too far into biographical details of my own life, I want to make my main submission clear right off the jump here. I think that Lethbridge should maintain at least two constituencies, which are entirely contained within the boundaries of the city of Lethbridge. So that map that's displayed right there that's just fine with me, and I think that that's the way it should stay. And here are some reasons why I think that. The city of Lethbridge, to me, especially having grown up in the neighborhood, in the region, I think it does represent a distinct community of interest, separate and apart from other communities in Southwest Alberta. We've had lots of conversations about, Coaldale and Colehurst. We've mentioned places like Sterling and Cardston and McGrath and Raymond. And I would say Lethbridge is pretty fundamentally distinct from those places. And I could even draw an argument that those places are pretty distinct from one another, too. If you're in Raymond on a Friday night in the fall, you're going to know that there's a big football game going on. You're not going to see that in a place like McGrath or Sterling. It's much more in the water in a place like Raymond than it is in those other places. And residents of our community here in Lethbridge face challenges that aren't experienced by families like my parents in Sterling, families like my own when I was growing up in Sterling. We have to think about ballooning housing costs. We have to think about downtown social disorder in this community. In Sterling, those things aren't an issue. There's no downtown to speak of in Sterling. Lethbridge is also identifiably different in its population dynamics from the surrounding communities. We're much more diverse in terms of our cultural backgrounds, our economic participation, our occupational profile. I had a chance to look at some of the statistics that are aggregated by the province on their big data dashboard. If you have a chance to look at that, it's fun when you get to see the big spikes in population and other stats. Lethbridge has, so just on the note of cultural and economic diversity in Lethbridge, Lethbridge is significantly more diverse than these outlying communities. When you think about the proportion of our community that is of Indigenous heritage, we have about 6.6% of our community is Indigenous. You compare that to a place like Raymond, it's about 3.5%, 3.2% in Picture Butte. We also have about just shy of 7% of our community or they speak a language other than the two official languages. If you go to a place like Fort Macleod, that's 4%. If you go to a place like Raymond, that's 1%. Very, very few folks don't speak English or French in those communities, whereas we have a very thriving linguistic diversity in this community. And finally, I think it was Rob who mentioned he used restaurants because he thinks a lot about food, which is great. But about 15% of our community here in Lethbridge identifies as a member of a visible minority community. And if you go to places like Sterling, where I grew up, Coaldale, Colehurst, you're seeing those numbers slip to below 5%, and in many cases 1 or 2%. And so all of this is to say that taken together as a city, Lethbridge is a very different place than the places that surround it. And it's very unique and I would argue discrete from those places. And so having a boundary that involves Coaldale, Colehurst, Sterling, Raymond, whatever it is, in a riding that also includes big chunks of Lethbridge, that really, I think, takes away from the representational capacity of the system to say, have a member of a Filipino community or the Nepalese community have a serious shot at having an MLA that looks like them, or at least someone who speaks meaningfully to their needs and their cultural identities. And on the flip side, if we think about it from the perspective of people in Sterling or Colehurst or Coaldale or wherever it is, incorporating outlying communities into constituencies in which Lethbridge is a major part would kind of compromise those communities' ability to be meaningfully represented by their MLA. And I think this is kind of to Scott's point too, where I was actually thinking about schools too. I think about how differently people like my parents in Sterling think about schools. My parents take care of my nephew, like I mentioned. He's about almost exactly the same age. They're 6 weeks apart, my daughter and my nephew. My daughter goes to LCI here in town. That school is full to bursting. It needs renovations desperately. Sterling is not Alcoma, but it is not a large place. The concern has always been, will there be enough young families to continue supporting a high school in the community that I grew up in? So when we consider schools, an area of provincial jurisdiction, And the ways that those are approached in a major city, or a mid-sized city at least, like Lethbridge versus a smaller community like Sterling or Colehurst or Raymond, that presents representational difficulties for the MLA who would be representing both of those areas. And I think this is going to be my last point. If mid-sized cities like Lethbridge get drawn into constituencies with large rural areas, I'm concerned that it'll exacerbate some of the existing rural and urban divides that we see in the province right now. For a long time, rural-urban divides have really driven politics in this province. There's always going to be an element of that. But my point is that after the commission, after you folks are done your work, I have no doubt there will be lots of seats in Edmonton, there'll be lots of seats in Calgary, and there will be lots of seats that are primarily rural. But if we do not have seats that represent the unique, discrete interests of a mid-sized city like Lethbridge, or even extrapolating to places like Red Deer, Medicine Hat, or things like that, you're losing that set of interests. Last point, if seats like this one don't exist, there'll be a stronger incentive for the parties to pick a side without understanding that there are many Albertans for whom rural or big city are both uncomfortable descriptors for them.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gardner. Any questions from the panelists?
Felt like I just regurgitated everything everybody else said.
Yeah, but it was well done.
Yeah.
Well said.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Cameron Mills.
So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you here today. My name is Cameron Mills. I'm a proud Lethbridge resident. I'm also raising my 3 boys here in town along with my wife. And in a professional capacity, I work for the town of Coaldale, where I'm the Director of Growth and Investment. I'm not speaking to you here today in that capacity or as a representative of that community, but it does frame if you will, sort of the lens through which I look at the world, working in a capacity where economic development is my principal priority. Probably my singular identity is Little League baseball coach. I did miss my son's game, for which I'm the head coach this evening, and the text messages from my wife and other coaches suggest that the team missed me greatly, because we did not do well. So the Oilers did win 6-3, though. So balance is important, and balance is really the theme through which I would look at this particular issue. So if I may, I'm just taking a look at the broader region and the electoral districts in terms of how that works. So unlike Lethbridge, Medicine Hat constitute or combines rural and urban representation through the Brooks Medicine Hat and Cypress Medicine Hat district. I believe that this promotes a more integrated and cooperative approach for regional planning and economic development for that region. Proof of this lies in the recent publication of the Southeast Alberta Economic Opportunity Strategy and Implementation Framework. So the municipalities in that region were provided with a $200,000 grant from the province to promote regional cooperation and economic development, and that was between Medicine Hat, Red Cliff, Bow Island, Foremost, as well as the counties of Cypress and 40 Mile. So my preference, and I'm likely not going to make a ton of friends here in the gallery today, but that's okay. We can disagree. By redistributing electoral boundaries in Lethbridge in a way that also brings urban and rural under a unified electoral umbrella, I believe that our region would be much better positioned to pursue a more integrative approach to regional development and collaboration, especially as it relates to the development of the agri-food value-added processing sector and realizing the full potential of what has been branded as Canada's premier food corridor. My proposal is to merge the existing Lethbridge East and West with surrounding rural areas to create 4 blended ridings, shown here as Lethbridge Livingstone, Lethbridge Little Bow, Lethbridge Tabor, and Lethbridge Cardston. Doing so will better serve the regional economic interests, acknowledging Lethbridge as the hub of the regional economy, and tying Lethbridge to the food production corridor to the east, to the resource and tourism economies of the west, to the very important Coutts border crossing to the south, and to the major transportation corridor to the north, connecting Lethbridge and the region to the rest of the province. Simply put, Lethbridge's current electoral division risks entrenching urban-rural divides by carving out the city into isolated segments that do not include the rural communities that rely on Lethbridge as a regional service hub. This structure can create tension or disconnection between the needs of Lethbridge and the interests of surrounding municipalities like Coaldale, Lethbridge County, and Picture Butte, all of which contribute to and depend on the region's broader economic success. As an alternative, the proposed new model ties Lethbridge into the developing agri-food manufacturing economy, known as Canada's premier food corridor to the east, provides Lethbridge with a direct tie to Alberta's main border crossing with the United States to the south, connects Lethbridge with the resource development and tourism economies of the west, and connects Lethbridge with a voice representing the massively important transportation corridors to the north. Additionally, such a model would eliminate what I believe is an unnecessary effective representation issue in the form of Cardston-Siksika as a riding. So this riding currently stretches from the border all the way to east of Calgary, making it entirely too large and fragmented to offer effective representation to those living within the riding. It groups dozens of communities that are disconnected from one another and ignores real-world economic relationships that exist outside of that riding. So to conclude, the proposed realignment of boundaries as depicted here isn't just a geographic improvement. It would serve as a strategic signal to the province that Southern Alberta is serious about growing its agri-food economy as one integrated region centered in Lethbridge. As many of you probably know, Lethbridge already supplies potable water to numerous surrounding municipalities, including Coaldale, Picture Butte, Lethbridge County, and others. It also remains the educational anchor of Southern Alberta. Students from across the proposed new divisions pursue studies at the University of Lethbridge and Lethbridge Polytechnic. Our industry in those areas relies on those institutions to train their workforce. Many of their graduates enter careers in the agriculture and food sectors, contributing directly to our shared regional economy. These educational pathways reinforce the need for a boundary system that recognizes and reflects how deeply interconnected our communities are. Finally, Lethbridge serves as the healthcare hub for all municipalities in these proposed new divisions, with care centered around the expanding Chinook Regional Hospital. And Lethbridge will soon also be educating doctors at the University of Lethbridge with a focus on expanding access to rural medicine specifically, with graduates who are intent on providing healthcare not only to Lethbridge residents, but residents across these 4 divisions and beyond. That is why I believe it is critically important to bring the Medicine Hat hybrid model over to Lethbridge and break down the existing urban-rural divide that risks standing in the way of maximizing our region's potential.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. Greg, starting left.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that presentation, and thank you for putting together the PowerPoint slide. Part of our role here, both through legislation as well as the core reference cases that guide our work, in particular the Saskatchewan reference. One of the elements of that in describing voter parity is factors like geography, community history, community interest, and minority representation need to be taken into account and I'll just quote, to ensure our legislative assemblies effectively represent the diversity of the social mosaic. I guess I'm curious how you feel that, but carving up Lethbridge into 4 pieces, especially given the context of what else we've heard today about the unique nature of Lethbridge as a city, satisfies that requirement?
So I don't fundamentally believe that there's a significant difference between the people in the rural regions relative to the people of Lethbridge. That's my perspective on it. I understand that there's perhaps more ethnic diversity within the city of Lethbridge itself. That is true within Lethbridge. It's also true within regions of Lethbridge. It's also true that other areas are diversifying at a significant rate. Taber has led the charge with respect to Alberta's rural immigration program, for example, within the region. So I think within those capacities, I believe that the benefit of addressing regional representation outweighs the potential benefit of, perhaps visibility concerns that were raised here this evening. So to put that into perspective, one of the issues that I think is incredibly important to consider in terms of the success of Lethbridge itself is that, as was mentioned, so Lethbridge provides water, for example, to surrounding communities. So water is something that the province has significant jurisdiction over. If you've driven to the east of town, you've driven through Coaldale. It's a community it's growing significantly. It's about 10,000 people now. To the east of Coaldale, within Lethbridge County, you'll see the McCain French fry plant. So that plant has recently received a $650 million investment from the McCain's Corporation. It's their largest investment they've ever made into a plant, and that's going to fundamentally double the size of that plant. And the reason I bring that up is that the McCain's plant, which is located east of Coaldale, draws its water from the city of Lethbridge. To put into perspective of how much water it draws, the McCain's plant uses fundamentally the same amount of water in a given day as the town of Coaldale, a town of 10,000 people. So it is a very significant customer, and that represents one plant. The province's economic strategy involves growing the agri-food corridor and finding potentially upwards of 10 additional McCain's plants to open within the broader region between Lethbridge and Medicine Hat, which represents billions upon billions of dollars of potentially local or foreign direct investment into our region. On the flip side of that water issue, though, so the city of Lethbridge is in charge of providing that water. They're the only ones with the capacity to treat and produce water at that scale, for which we're very thankful to be customers. But in order to do that, they need access to water. They need rights for water. Within the region, I believe the figure is approximately 97% of the water rights are held by the rural jurisdictions. So Lethbridge and the other urban jurisdictions represent 3% of the available water rights. And so in order for Lethbridge to grow, it needs access to those things. So the water issue is one issue amongst many, is one where both of those, both the urban and rural, need to work together in order for everyone to benefit. And
Father Time is not kind to us. I've got 10 minutes, or 2 more presenters and 20 minutes. Okay. Mr. Mills, your presentation is very interesting. So I'm going to ask that you just stay could you stay in the audience? Of course. Let's do the last 2 presenters. And if we have time to engage your dialogue, because I think you've touched a nerve that there may be some questions. So I'll just excuse you from the podium now, and I'll call on Tamara.
Thank you to the Commission. I'm Tamara Mianega. I am from the MD of Taber. I farm north of Taber. I'm a proud U of L alumni. I reside on a 3rd-generation mixed farm with potatoes as our primary crop. The family was interned during World War II and lived in a wooden granary at a time when the Japanese couldn't own land. Currently, the farm is run by 3 cousins who are trained as engineers, accountants, and irrigation technologists. We farm near the north boundary of Taber-Warner. I share those details so you understand that most farms reflect a strong academic and research side. I'm the first female reeve for the municipal district of Taber that boasts a population of 7,924 with a median age of 27.4, a youthful municipality. Through council motion, due to our concern the impact electoral boundaries have on the residents, we have a request of the Commission. MD of Taber has the Oldman River run through it, which is the dividing line for the current provincial ridings of Taber-Warner and Cardston-Siksika. 2 ridings and double representation in the municipality have been very beneficial. Rural communities value their legislative representation. As mentioned in other presentations, urbans value their uniqueness, but the same holds fiercely true of rural. And it is not ideal to grab areas just to meet the population threshold. MD of Taber is a diverse, culturally, socially, and economically wide. MD includes the hamlets and the communities located within Barnwell, Taber, Vauxhall, Grassy Lake, Hayes, and Enchant. Alberta and Canada's housing demands have seen an outflow to rural areas. The hamlet of Grassy Lake shrunk to a small 300 population, but within the last 10 years, the last lot was sold and the population has ballooned to 1,000. The MD of Taber is building a subdivision of 48 lots. We are unique, and we implore the Commission that the electoral representation must follow the legislation and take in much more than the population. We need representation that reflects the rural lifestyle. When oil declined, compounded by the unrest of the pandemic, agriculture provided economic stability. The immense physical size of rural ridings is demanding on the elected member of the Legislative Assembly. The diversity within the riding is incredible, as noted by Councillor Crowson when she referenced that the city of Lethbridge is not the same as Colehurst. So, residents of Vauxhall on Highway 36 and rural residents who reside in the north end of MD of Taber, which is currently represented by Cardston-Siksika, are drastically different than Strathmore. It will dilute the representation and concerns of the area, which provide economic stability to the province if we just grab rural boundaries to meet the population threshold. The Federal Electoral Boundaries Review provided possible riding realignment option. It allowed for discussion and suggestions on the impact of the change. In the end, due to public impact, it altered the proposed boundaries. This process is challenging. We ask the Commission if the proposed boundaries will be available to Alberta residents for comment prior to the final draft being presented to the Speaker.
In answer to that question, yes. And it's my failing I didn't outline the process at the beginning. We're mandated by the legislation to provide an interim report by the end of October. And so that interim report will be filed with the Speaker, put in the Alberta Gazette, and available to the public. The succeeding 5 months, public can have input and response to it. And in late March of 2026, we have to then submit our final report.
Thank you.
So you do have a window.
Yes, that is actually very important to the MD of Taber and our residents.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions of this presenter?
I'm going to blame Mr. Mills for this because he sparked a thought, and I'm going to ask it of you instead. But Taber is growing, wonderful. Lots of issues as you scale up. I'm glad you're there to help oversee that. I wanted to ask a bit about the economic geography, so to speak. I wanted to ask about the connectivity to Taber of some of the surrounding villages. Think of Vauxhall, for example. Is that where people from Vauxhall they go to Taber, right?
Not necessarily.
Where do they shop?
They have a direct route to Lethbridge. They go to Brook. So rural people are very mobile, and they'll go to where the best deal is or where their economics make sense.
So then Taber's economic, is it an economic magnet for the surrounding countryside?
Because it has the largest population in the MD of Taber, it has some natural opportunities that we don't have in the other municipalities. they have great recreation. The retail has increased. So people do naturally come. We have three large implement dealerships. So people do make Tabor a central hub. But our neighbors to the west in Coaldale, to North Brooks, those centers see lots of activity as well. And between the town of Tabor and the MD of Tabor and those other rurals, we work really hard. But it is not lost on me, the last presenter, that we need to have a better relationship with the city of Lethbridge. But I do catch my breath when I see that diagram.
Thank you.
You don't like the four sort of...
I do worry about that you could have 4 representatives from the city of Lethbridge.
Oh, I see. I have a question. Okay. In terms of, Tamara, in terms of your, where would you change the boundaries to achieve the goal that you're talking about with respect to Tabor and bearing in mind some of the comments that Mr. Mills made, because I mean that economic corridor aspect is interesting.
Mm-hmm. So I don't think you have to get caught up in municipal boundaries. I think rural people, and I do count Coaldale, Tabor, Bow Island, Brooks in a rural segment. We all quite pride ourselves in that fact. So I don't think you have to worry about that municipal boundary. You could look at a bit of population because I recognize that's one of the primary factors, but I don't think you should reach out to a Strathmore just to build the number. And I'll speak personally, this is not, the other comments were council approved and verified, whereas personally, Cardston-Siksika doesn't make sense. And so we struggle with that because our residents are represented by them with Vulcan. So somehow we need to fix that. And I believe that next speaker will speak more eloquently to that.
How would you change? Let's just think about, I don't know if we could put it up on the screen, but if you look at the Tabor-Warner constituency, would you change the east boundary, and would you change the north boundary?
So we could go north a bit more. Brooks probably is more natural than Lethbridge, but again, this is my own personal, so I want to be very careful. We really want to see what those electoral boundaries look like before we have a big comment. And
I'm thinking about like the community interest, that sort of, that the commonalities between. So would you?
Well, we see it federally, the challenges of having, so in our Little Bow riding, we have from Chestermere, Strathmore, Brooks, Tabor, Bow Island, and it's immense. And so it is a challenge for the MP, and we need more than that. I mean, our requirements with the province deals with municipalities so intensely, and if we don't have that connectivity to the legislature, I very much worry that urban concerns will become the priority of whichever government is elected.
Right.
So I'd like to keep it more rural.
Can I just confirm, you are the Reeve of the MD of Tabor?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Sure.
So previously there was a Cardston-Tabor-Warner, if I'm not mistaken, more of an east-west orientation. So notwithstanding sort of, not specific, but is that a more natural sort of alignment than the north-south in terms of the way Cardston-Siksika is? I know you're not in Cardston-Siksika, but is it a little more natural to go east-west for you, or is that?
Again, on a personal note,
yeah, just
yes.
you personally, not the,
yes.
You take the Reeve hat
this
off.
long, narrow.
Yeah.
No, because I do represent the residents who are north of the Old Man River, and so it hasn't been a natural fit.
So just to make clear, that boundary, the Old Man River, Tabor County of Tabor is on both sides of the
yes, and so, but there is beauty in having 2 MLAs.
To Scandia, your MD?
No, Bow River.
Okay, right there.
Our north boundary is the Bow River.
Okay.
So the takeaway for your presentation, you really want to see our interim report. Okay, good.
So,
thank you.
All is well.
That takes us to Randy Bullock. Is Randy here? Oh, okay.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Am I the last speaker tonight? Possibly.
Yes, you're the last scheduled speaker.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, thank you. I appreciate this time being allocated to me.
Start at 9:10.
Yeah, do that. Thanks for allocating me some time tonight. My name is Randy Bullock. A little bit about myself. I grew up in West Lethbridge. And like Tamara, I'm also a U of L alumnus. I forgot about that, but that was a long time ago. Currently, I'm a resident of Cardston County. I have lived in Cardston County for the last 17 years. And I am also the chief elected official of Cardston County. I'm acting as the current Reeve. And I've been the Reeve for 5.5 of the last 7 years. So I've been exposed to the changes that were made prior to the election in 2019. And I'm here to speak about the configuration of Cardston-Siksika. With the permission of my council and the area residents, I'm here to express observations and concerns with this current layout. We like to call it the figure 8. Prior to the 2019 election, the boundary was realigned in an obscure north-south layout, which extends from the United States-Canada border northward 260 kilometers to the Strathmore area, as outlined here. This configuration does not represent the demographic of the South. Historically, when my father-in-law served as the MLA for 2 terms, the configuration was an east-west layout, just as you mentioned earlier. It was called Cardston-Tabor-Warner. And it's already been said here tonight at this microphone that Albertans are connected by highways. Highway 5, 4, and 3, it's a big corridor of a lot of economic activity that connects our industries and our people. I took the time prior to coming here tonight to reach out to other elected officials, both urban and rural elected officials within Cardston-Siksika. And I haven't found one elected official that finds merit with the current layout. And let me tell you, I've talked to several, multiple councillors, Reeves, mayors. They feel that they're underrepresented. We want our MLA focused on the needs of our immediate area. To make the MLA travel in such a large area, and I said 260 kilometers, all I did was Google that because I didn't really know the distance that he was going. It makes it very difficult. I don't know how anybody could represent that many rural and urban municipalities. That's unfair to him. How does he engage with the people? How does he hear the people's needs? It just doesn't seem like it's feasible for him to do that under the current configuration. We want something similar to the old east-west boundary. Cardston, Raymond McGrath, Sterling, Warner, even the Blood Tribe, that was all part of the other configuration. And this figure 8 should have never happened to begin with. One point I'd like to touch on, Cardston County is considered a have-not municipality. We're not flush with cash. We'd like to do many infrastructure improvements. And we're competing with larger, more affluent rural municipalities and urbans for the allocation of funding. We're competing with the MD of Tabor, Vulcan County, County of Lethbridge. Those 3 municipalities have much bigger pockets than we have. So we're actively, continually lobbying our MLA to hear us because we need their help. We need grant money to survive. So it would be nice if we didn't have to compete with the larger, more affluent municipalities. And we've even heard our MLS say there's only so much that can go around. My area is so big, there's only so much to the pie. One mayor said of a local town in Cardston County, he says, "How does this hourglass configuration help us with regional planning and infrastructure? When it pinches off like that, the communities, the people are not connected." So I think I've said enough. Please reconsider Cardston Siksika as one area of needed change. Connect the people with the more efficient boundary, connect the people and their economies. And I'll leave you, if you're going to remember one thing from me, remember this. It's not too late to change the figure eight.
I like it. I'm typing.
So I talked to mayors, councillors, reeds. We know why it was done previous to the election. That's no front page news, but I think I echo the concerns of hundreds, if not thousands of people with this configuration.
Yes. Why are you the only person speaking to this issue today? Why aren't there any other elected officials here from that riding?
To be honest with you, I mean, I reached out to multiple. I came here tonight thinking that my voice would be heard, that I could make a difference, and I don't know if they felt the same way. Because this is a public hearing. We know how public hearings go. There is the impression that you're here just to follow the protocol. Will they actually listen to us is another story. I guess I'm here tonight thinking that you'll listen.
Okay. Thank you.
I think it's my duty as well as a Reed, representing about 5,000 people. That's not considering the town's elected officials that I contacted. There is an obligation to be here tonight as a Reed.
Thank you. Other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. Randy, how far would you, so if you, imagining you went back to the way it was, so in east-west, how far east would you go? What would you think would be the sort of the common interest, economic corridor?
The alignment seemed to work. My father-in-law was the MLA for 2 terms. Bryce Jacobs was his name. He lived in Mountain View, Alberta. He was able to canvass that east-west corridor with no problem.
That extended into Tabor.
It did. It included Tabor, yes. Tabor, Warner, Carson, Tabor, Warner. I mean, it doesn't have to be exactly that, but the southern towns are more interconnected with each other, socially, economically. But when you go up to a pinch point like that, I don't know of any of my people that are going north up that way.
And how far north would you go in your mind?
I know that one of the considerations is population. So that's for you to figure out. I honestly don't know what to tell you. I have heard the talk here tonight of mixing rural and urban. I don't know how I feel about that. I know that could work, but I guess I'm elected to represent rural Alberta right now. I'm not an urban.
Does it extend over to, does Glenwood extend over to, I'm looking at it a little more blown up, but if you're that stand up north and you go to Highway number 3, you include Brockett and Pincher Creek, would that?
That's in the MD of Willow Creek, actually. Yeah.
We don't have to be, we're not bound by MDs.
Yeah, well, yeah.
I'm more interested in the community interest aspect from your perspective. So, or the connectivity of and commonality of the various communities and the people that live in them.
I think it's more east-west linear. To go up that far, I don't see the connectivity there with one cloud. I don't.
That's what I'm interested in. Thank you.
You mentioned that many of your fellow Reeves and mayors were conflicted about whether to come and make a presentation, but I hope you will, when you talk to them, tell them that we are doing more hearings.
Well,
and there are more opportunities because there's going to be, virtual interaction phase as well as these kind of public hearings. So we're definitely going to be down in Medicine Hat and the like. So tell them to show up.
I read to one of my fellow Reeves on the phone yesterday. I have your email. I read to him every event that you're going to be at. And so he most likely plans to come to Calgary.
Oh,
okay. Brooks is open.
Yeah.
Please
Brooks is open.
send some of the rural people to Brooks.
How many times would you like? Scott, you want to?
What I would like to know.
We don't want that mixed up in Calgary. Just,
You have a full-orama.
yeah.
What I'd like to know is, I received the email and not too many people were aware it was going on. Why did I receive the email? Who else received the email?
Well, we can speak to that. I can speak to that partially, but every municipality, every reeve, every mayor of the province received a letter. Am I not correct, Aaron? Pardon? Yeah. Yeah. Everyone got it.
Okay, just,
yeah.
That's probably, it's kind of
It was right after Easter. It was late April, actually.
okay, that makes more sense. My fellow councilman said, go ahead and do it. I got text messages from them all day today. This is what you need to tell them. So I'm representing multiple people.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yes, yes. Now, we're just past closing. I did cut off Mr. Mills, partly because I just could sense the table filled with questions here. So is there any other questions of Mr. Mills? He came up with the century.
Yeah, I would love to see his proposal again, and then some questions on.
Please come forward, and let me ask you this, right? Use the chair's prerogative. Your model replaces 5 ridings with 4, does it not?
It does.
Okay.
So what it does,
so that's
it
music
takes,
to the commission's ears.
correct.
In some
So
ways.
Southern Alberta would be represented by 6 ridings,
right,
east to west.
Okay. Okay. And have you done the math on the population?
I have. I don't have perfect statistics, but my I think reasonably conservative estimates have each of those ridings between approximately 52 and 62,000 people, with Lethbridge Tabor being the smallest of the 4. Cypress Medicine Hat would grow because that would put Foremost and Bow Island into that riding.
Okay. Okay, so let's from the left, Mr. Evans, questions across.
Okay, thank you.
One question per panelist.
Yeah, I just want to know, in terms of Lethbridge and Medicine Hat, where you, not just from a general perspective, where have you divided that up? How have you divided up the city?
Within Lethbridge itself?
Yeah, and then Medicine Hat.
So Medicine Hat is currently split in the same way.
Okay.
That's fundamentally the current. So the current is this, and then Cypress basically just moved. So the way we looked at this was that Lethbridge Little Bow would encompass. So we use north of 6th Avenue. So 6th Avenue, when you're in Lethbridge, is Whoop Up Drive, the main bridge that connects from east to west Lethbridge, is 6th Avenue once it's on this side of the river. So 6th Avenue being the dividing line north-south, everything east of the river, and everything west of Mayor McGrath Drive, which then turns into 26th Street North. So fundamentally, North Lethbridge being within Lethbridge Little Bow. Lethbridge Tabor encapsulating basically everything 26th Street and east, as well as Mayor McGrath Drive. So the new subdivision that was mentioned as growing within South Lethbridge would be within Lethbridge Tabor. Lethbridge Tabor, again, is the smallest of these municipalities, but also contains a relatively significant growth portion of Lethbridge, and also has Tabor and Coaldale, which are the largest of the small urbans within the region, and also the fastest growing of those. So that riding I would expect to catch up over time.
What did you estimate its population to be?
For that, approximately 52,300. for Lethbridge Tabor. Lethbridge Littlebow would have been at about 58,200. Lethbridge Cardston, which is basically south of 6th Avenue and west of Mayor McGrath Drive. So that's the riding I would find myself in. I live down by the college, as well as the southern portion of West Lethbridge, south of Whoop Up Drive. And that would merge to the area that encompasses Pincher Creek, I believe, to the west, as well as Cardston and those communities to the south down to the border.
What was the streets again? Sorry.
So that would be West Lethbridge, south of Whoop Up Drive, so south of that dividing bridge line. And on the east side of the river, it would be south of 6th Avenue and west of Mayor McGrath Drive, which is also Highway 5. Okay. And then Lethbridge Livingstone would be the portion of West Lethbridge north of Whoop Up Drive. And the population estimate for Lethbridge Livingstone would be 64,000 approximately.
Thank you. Susan?
I'm going to pass.
Okay. Okay.
Well, thank you. It's fascinating to look at maps. I'm certainly, speaking for myself, I'm obsessed by looking at maps. But I wanted to ask you about the economic geography that you allude to, and surely must be a key part of your argument.
Absolutely.
And so I'd like to hear a lot more about it, and you can't do it here tonight, but this kind of envisioning we see in the map comes out of a lot of economic planning study and struggling, I presume. So I think the rationale has to be located in the economic geography, the magnet feature, as I expressed it to one of the other speakers. The magnet feature for the entire region has to be a key part of your argument to justify this. So am I right in thinking that you see health and medicine, and indeed medical research, you see irrigation, planning and services, you see other form, and particularly agricultural side servicing, as keying on Lethbridge as its service core?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously the economic, I think, argument is pretty key, and I think it's pretty clear. So as I described, so if you look at the economy of the Lethbridge Tabor region, for example, is centered around food production, particularly in the growth sector of agri-food processing, which is taking a raw product and turning it into something value added, which is something the province is obviously very eager to achieve. We share water across that region. We buy water. So we're very interconnected that way. Same thing with Lethbridge Cardston, again, with respect to the idea that, Lethbridge is the hub of the economic region. What happens with respect to, access to the border down at Coutts, which is Alberta's primary border crossing, obviously impacts Lethbridge economically a great deal, right? So there's that connection there. Lethbridge Livingstone, a number of speakers this evening have talked about the development of the eastern slopes of the Rockies. So this would tie some representation from Lethbridge to the region, which is also considering that. And so the MLA tasked with that riding would be tasked with balancing the considerations of those communities. I think what it fundamentally comes down to for me is this idea that there's really two ways of looking at it. So I really do believe in the effectiveness of local government. I believe as a Lethbridge resident that our elected officials here in Lethbridge are doing a spectacular job representing local issues and dealing with them locally. I also think that they do a phenomenal job representing those local issues to the province. I know they engage in trips to Edmonton to speak to ministers about Lethbridge's concerns, and I think they've done very well for that. I believe that it would be an opportunity for the province to look at the MLA's role as bridging those local concerns. We have very effective local representation that considers those local issues and only those local issues. But an MLA would be tasked with looking at things on a more broad perspective and understanding that the economy doesn't end where the city border ends, nor does the need for water end where the rural border ends. And so having someone that can work with disparate councils and say, look, these are the broader regional issues that we have to solve, and let's solve them together, I think that's an incredible opportunity.
You wouldn't be concerned, as I think a previous speaker was, under your model of all 4 members of the legislature living in the city of Lethbridge, would you?
I would not. It's certainly possible. It's also possible that none of them live in Lethbridge. And so to me, I trust the people that are elected to do the right thing fundamentally. So I don't know all of the existing people in those ridings. But I don't really believe I have to. I know the types of people that tend to run for these office. I believe in them. I believe they're moral people. I believe that their job is to represent the interests of their riding and also the interests of the broader province, which is their mandate. And so from my perspective, the same argument could be said, well, if we say, well, it's really important for the MLA of West Lethbridge to live, that represents a portion of West Lethbridge to live in West Lethbridge. Well, then how can we possibly live with the Cards from Siksika riding, right? Their representation is just as important as anyone else's. So the reality is we're always going to be drawing lines. MLAs are always going to have to travel to a certain extent. They're always going to have to represent diverse views. My experience in working with MLAs as well as municipal councilors is that they generally do a pretty good job of doing that.
Okay.
One quick question and just a point of clarification. So you work in Coaldale? Is that
I do. I live in Lethbridge.
Okay. So that's really the essence of my question. Coming back to the question of communities of interest. You live in Lethbridge, work in Coaldale. Why don't you live in Coaldale? What's the difference? Like, what is it about Lethbridge that says, I want to live in Lethbridge? There's obviously something different.
Sure. Well, there's a few things. So I, prior to working for the town of Coaldale, I worked for the largest real estate developer in the region. So when you were asking about where the houses are going, I was, biting my lip because I was, I know where they're going. I know. So largely at West Lethbridge, South End. Anyway, I took an opportunity to go work for the town of Coaldale. Town of Coaldale generally takes a little bit of a different approach to how we do administration. I won't get into it, but I had an opportunity to work with a really great team out there. I had just finished renovating a home a block away from my mother who needed some care in South Lethbridge, from basement to second story, and I will move when I die because I'm never doing that again. But the other reality for me is, again, so my role with the town of Coaldale as Director of Growth and Investment, so I oversee economic development, planning, engineering, as well as communications and government relations. I deal with all the grant work as well within my department, and we have a relatively small staff that work extremely hard for that community. I find that I do my job best by not being a resident. And the reason I say that is that my job is to provide my elected officials with advice. Sometimes that advice doesn't always make everybody happy. I mean, everyone is aware of that. So if there is an issue that generally is the planning department, if there's an issue that's brought forward to the council that, I'm suggesting we rezone a parcel next to someone else, if that person next to them was my kid's hockey coach, it would be very, very difficult. My job is to provide advice, which is professional in nature, and I find that I'm best doing that without needing to worry about what I'm going to hear at the grocery store after I leave work.
Mr. Mills, thank you very much. We have one short question, and then we're going to conclude.
Thank you. I'm just a little slow off the hop because I'm new to this. I think we all are. But the concept that you're presenting, when we talk about a big region like that, and we're talking about building together for economic reasons would be the main goal, one of the main goals, could we look at redrawing but leaving the city of Lethbridge alone? I know the population is there, so the 4 squares, the 4 type of squares aren't going to work. But could something like that, because what we have, I agree with you, does not currently work, but could Lethbridge, would that be a consideration, or could you speak to that where Lethbridge is a standalone city and represents its unique interests, and the economic driver is the lower part as identified there.
I don't think that would be as effective. So again, I look at this as an opportunity to look at the issue a little bit differently. I believe that Lethbridge is fundamentally tied to those other communities. I do not believe that it's fundamentally unique and different from those other communities. There are elements of the community that certainly are, just as there are elements of the community in Foremost that are different from the community in Bow Island. But again, the reality is, you know, my son plays on a baseball team here in Lethbridge with other players from as far away as Milk River, right? So people come in, so there's Milk River players, Claresholm, Fort McLeod, Foremost, all within that region. That's one example amongst millions where these are people that travel in and travel out of the community, and I look at it as being part of a broader region. So to me, I don't really think it would work as well. I don't think it would serve the goal of tying our economic interests together and promoting the sort of cooperation that I think can exist to really maximize our potential.
Thank you.
Mr. Mills, we've been going since 9 o'clock this morning, and we've gone over a little. Thank you so much for your presentation. Make sure that Aaron gets your PowerPoint and any brief summary of your presentation as well. If you could do that, that would be appreciated. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you to all the presenters. Thank you for everyone for coming out and for the thoughtful presentations and the enthusiasm with which you all presented. And we thought we had a difficult job before this evening. You haven't made it any easier for us, by the way. But thank you very much. And I do encourage you, especially some of the latter presenters, go tell your people to go to Brooks. Don't bring them to Calgary. We've got enough presenters in Calgary. Brooks and Medicine Hat have some time slots, and that's next week, Thursday and Friday. So thank you very much.